Hey friends, I have some huge news to share, and I promise I won't ramble too much before we get into it. We're keeping it short, sweet, and to the point. So a few months ago I started writing all of the music for my videos, recording all the background footage behind Giraffe Sean for my videos, and even making handmade collages which I would translate to digital format to use in my videos as well. It all started a few months ago with my video about Courage the Cowardly Dog and the Queen of the Black Puddle. As a result, I found myself with a bunch of these cool handmade collages and nothing to do with them other than hang them on my wall. So I decided I'm gonna be sending them out to my fans. If you want one, all you have to do is be active in any paid tier on Patreon. The catch is, when I go to mail one of these out, I'm going to be picking from the list of active members on Patreon. So again, you have to still be actively subscribed to any tier to be eligible. The true 90s kids tier is the front of the line, then the 2000s kids, then the nostalgic walkers, going in order from who has been subscribed the longest to the most recent. With that being said, please be patient because I already have like 30 active subscribers across the 3 different tiers. So when you sign up, keep in mind that if you want a handmade collage, along with a handwritten letter and a mystery merch item from me, you need to be patient, please. I'm just one dude doing all of this DIY by myself, and I really appreciate you bearing with me. Furthermore, please make sure when you sign up for Patreon that you have your mailing address listed on your account for getting physical perks with your membership. I really don't want to have to message people asking for their mailing address because that's just kind of weird. If you do want one, please make sure that your Patreon account has that option turned on. In other news, I've got huge plans for future videos, and to raise funds for that, I'm going to be turning on YouTube memberships for those of you that want to show support but don't want to have to sign up for Patreon. With a membership here on YouTube, you're going to get access to videos early, and I'm also working on designing some exclusive emojis for members, as well as badges and other cool fun stuff. Fair warning though, YouTube's membership policy doesn't allow physical perks, however, so to make it clear as day, if you sign up for a YouTube membership, I cannot mail you a collage with peace and love. However, you will earn my unconditional love as well as some cool perks that I can provide here on YouTube. With that out of the way, thank you all so much for being here and for being a part of my YouTube journey. This video has been in the works for about 3 months now, and I put a lot of work into it, so I really appreciate you being here. Someone once told me the grass is much greener on the other side. Well, I paid a visit. While it's possible I missed it, it seemed so different, yet exactly the same. Looking back on As Told by Ginger, and specifically its amazing theme song, it's truly incredible to reflect on it simultaneously in the background as we discuss this show together. In the first video in this series, we took a moment to break down the deeper meaning behind the first sentence of these lyrics and how they shape the meaning of the song as a whole. The feeling of being a preteen, going through puberty in a confusing world that sometimes feels like it was designed to make you question yourself and why it is that everyone else's grass feels greener than yours. If you missed that video, I'll have it linked in the description box below. I highly recommend watching it before this one. Digging further into the show's theme song though, it's amazing to consider just how much the second sentence of these lyrics really would ring true as we continue to dissect more episodes of this show. What's interesting though is how the second sentence isn't exactly easy to break down at face value. As a kid, I remember hearing this song and getting it stuck in my head all the time, but never truly understanding the meaning behind much of the words other than the first sentence. What's amazing about that though is through the process of digesting the show as a whole, the sentiment behind the entirety of its theme song is conveyed to the viewer in a very strategic and captivating way. Reflecting back on it in hindsight as an adult is completely breathtaking, and it's one of those where the most impactful way to really pick up what they're putting down is to consume the whole story and reflect on the song after. Hearing the theme song for As Told by Ginger for the first time, you're going to develop your own personalized meaning for it at face value. Along the way of watching the show, of course, after having heard it so many times in so many episodes, you're going to have your perceptions of its meaning altered a few times along the way with each episode watched. But when you reach the end of the series and the end of the stories told, the song really does hit different. As we continue our journey in analyzing As Told by Ginger, Part 2 is going to focus again on expanding upon our understanding of Ginger and Darren, as well as the complex relationship that exists between the two of them, and much like the first video, the complex relationships with others that stand between them. Along the way, I ask that you keep the theme song in mind, as we're definitely going to circle back to it at the end. As the show would continue to progress further, so would the dynamic between Ginger and Darren, and over time, we would see it take turns that no one could have ever expected. For me personally though, one huge part of all this is reflecting on how important that this show was. In the first video in this series, we talked about how the show was pivotal to preteens who would face similar challenges in everyday life to what would be portrayed in this show. At that young of an age, seeing these dramatic situations unfold, as far-fetched as some of them may be, it's easy to draw similarities between your life and the events occurring on the screen. As a result, a lot of preteens who related to this show would find comfort in it, if not sometimes an outlet to take your mind off of the drama of middle school life in the real world for a while. In approaching this video though, I've found another more personal aspect as it pertains to how important this show is. We're gonna explore that a little further as we dive into an episode that in some ways hits a little too close to home for me. We're gonna start out this nostalgic walk down memory lane by checking out the season 2 episode, Never Can Say Goodbye.
The first day of the rest of your life. Now say ah for Dr. Weinstein. Just one more time.
Darren tenses up as we get a very hypnotizing slow motion shot of his headgear falling to the floor before the doctor opens up the curtains, letting some sunlight into the room as doves fly in the background. Moments later, we see Darren walking down the street feeling like $1,000,000. A group of girls ends up driving by and essentially catcalling him, telling him that he looks really good, which is a certain boost of confidence for him. Right after that, we see Ginger sitting at her desk in her bedroom as Darren crawls up to her window to talk to her, just like he always does.
Surprise!
Can you believe the amount of homework that Celia gave? Is this excruciating or what?
Hey, Ginger, if you took a minute to notice me, you might actually notice me, okay?
What's that supposed to... Darren, you're hot.
Well, I don't know about hot. Maybe lukewarm.
It's not that you weren't, it's just that now... What I'm trying to say is, I guess it's been a long time since I've seen you without metal.
Darren runs off to show his mom, and just like that, we cut to later that night where Ginger is sitting at the table having pizza with her friends and telling them all about how Darren got his headgear off and now he's a 12 out of 10. As they're eating and talking, Ginger's mom cuts them off saying that they're supposed to be focusing on life science.
Mom, this is life science. Kinda.
Yeah, see, Darren is like this beautiful butterfly that finally came out of its cocoon.
And now he's ready to spread his wings and take flight.
Ginger, I'm here to remind you that the last time you considered developing feelings for Darren, the whole thing was like over before it even started.
Wildly unrewarding for us spectators, gotta admit.
Ginger calms her friends down and tells them to rest assured that she isn't in love with Darren or anything, she's just really happy for him. The next day at school, we see Darren in the lunchroom telling all of the popular girls a very overdramatic version of what happened to him at the orthodontist's office, making it sound like he was pretty much attacked by this guy.
How could he? We didn't even hear the story yet.
Okay, let's not jump the gun, you guys. I'm sure Darren is going to be heading over here any minute now.
Oh, Darren,
All right.
Incredible. I mean, you.
Oh, Darren. Oh, you're so strong.
Okay, let's just give him one more minute.
As all of this is happening, we cut on over to the elementary school, where we take a look at the story revolving around Ginger's brother Carl. Him and his best friend Hoodsy are on the playground at recess, watching their classmate Brandon Higsby sitting in a corner holding a banana and crying his eyes out.
Did Brandon Higsby's pet monkey die?
It sure sounds that way.
But he was so young, so full of monkey life.
The two ask Brandon what happened to Mr. Licorice, and Brandon explains that he went missing and he thinks that someone stole him. Brandon tells him that he's currently offering his life savings of $46 and a piece of candy in exchange for anyone who can bring his monkey back. Carl tells him that he's in luck because him and Hoodsy do some private investigating in their spare time, citing themselves catching the dog napper in last season's finale, Season of Caprice. They agree to help Brandon get Mr. Licorice back, and just like that, we cut over to the girls' bathroom at Lucky Junior High, where Ginger is writing in her journal about how Darren didn't show up for lunch, wondering if he'd totally forgot that she even exists. As she's enjoying her privacy though, Courtney and Miranda walk in.
Would you mind checking my breath for freshness?
My pleasure. Wasabi vinaigrette with a hint of blackened sea scallop.
Oh my gosh, that was yesterday's lunch.
As Courtney brushes her teeth, Miranda brings up Darren and how she thinks he's super attractive now that he doesn't have headgear. Courtney spits out her toothpaste and she gets super excited, saying that if they get together, then later she gets with Darren's older brother Will, who she still has a huge crush on, then they can all have a double wedding, which would officially make Courtney and Miranda related. As the two are having their moment, Ginger hides in silence, looking kind of unsettled at this conversation. Courtney tells Miranda that she could easily have Darren wrapped around her finger, especially after their summer camp experience together.
I just hope Ginger Fatley doesn't take the news too hard. Darren was her BFF, and they're usually the first to know.
Well, in this case, Darren's BFF is gonna be the first thing to go.
We cut to later on at Brandon Higsby's house, where Carl and Hoodsy are arriving to do some investigating into the whole Mr. Licorice situation. In the kitchen, Brandon offers the boys some juice boxes, with the only two options being Carrot Beet and Tropical Punch. The two are almost offended by Brandon even offering them a choice, as they both see Tropical Punch as the only decision here. I will point out this part seems like a truly minor and irrelevant detail, however, we're going to end up circling back to this part later on, so keep it in the back of your mind. Carl and Hoodsy are both taken back by how crazy nice that Brandon's house is, from the entryway to the chef kitchen to the high-tech video surveillance system with cameras in every room except the bathroom. Carl points out how this makes the case way easier than he expected, as it's pretty much doing the job for him, and he tells Brandon to take him to the room where Mr. Licorice was last seen. Meanwhile, we cut on over to Ginger's room, where she is very elevated and telling Dodie and Macy all about what she heard while she was in the bathroom earlier today. She explains that because of how Miranda and Courtney were talking about it, saying that Ginger is going to have a lot less time with Darren and they hope that Ginger doesn't take it too hard, it made her feel like Miranda is only doing this to make her feel bad.
I'm not sure about that.
Stop it.
See for yourself.
Perhaps our little butterfly has indeed flown away.
Just because Darren has a girlfriend, it doesn't mean that he can't hang out with us anymore. Does it?
If that girlfriend is Miranda, I don't know what it means, Ginger.
Later that night, we see Ginger writing in her journal on the couch, thinking, and also watching some daytime talk shows. Ironically, we see her watching Dr. Fond Feelings, who, if you recall, Mipsy and Miranda bring up to Ginger in the Season 1 episode about Ginger realizing that she has feelings for Darren. Dr. Fond Feelings is talking about the different ways that people respond to rejection, and how using her patented Fond Feelings silent treatment is the best way to get the attention that you desire. As those words linger in Ginger's mind, we cut back over to Brandon Higsby's house, where Carl and Hoodsy are going through video footage with him. They go back to the night that Mr. Licorice went missing, and they watch the footage to see Brandon making him pray with him before having Mr. Licorice lock himself in his cage for bed. As Brandon rolls over and falls asleep, though, we see Mr. Licorice open the cage back up and climb out.
Aha! No! It can't be! I always thought it was Stuart who stole my money. How could he? No!
Carl and Hoodsy begin to ask Brandon questions about Mr. Licorice, trying to get to the bottom of why he may have left, and just like that, we cut back over to Lucky Junior High, where Courtney approaches Miranda at her locker. She asks if Miranda has made any progress in matchmaking for her and Will. However, Miranda says not yet, but she'll see what she can do, as she lists off the numerous things that her and Darren have planned together today after school.
Oh, I see. Yeah, this whole having a boyfriend thing really eats up your free time.
Yes, it certainly seems that way.
Well, I'll see ya. I gotta go meet Darren at his locker.
Of course you do.
Immediately after that, we see Ginger in the bathroom talking to herself about how she needs to follow what Dr. Fond Feelings said when Courtney walks in, still crying a bit. She gathers herself and asks Ginger if she'd be willing to check her breath for freshness, saying that's something that Miranda used to do for her all the time before Darren came into the picture.
Honestly, I never would have encouraged her to pursue this whole Darren thing had I known that she would become so totally and utterly unavailable to me.
I know exactly how you feel, Courtney.
No, you don't! Miranda was my right hand, and now that she's gone, it's like, well, all I have left is the left! The left, you see! The left!
As Courtney keeps selfishly popping off, Ginger says that she has to go, and she hurries out of the bathroom, forgetting to check Courtney's breath. A little while later, we see Ginger with Dodie and Macy as she prepares to put her plan into action. She says that Dr. Fond Feelings says if she doesn't do something now, she could lose Darren's friendship forever. And on that note, we see Ginger walk towards Darren's locker and right into his line of sight.
Ginge, I was just thinking about you. Listen, Miranda likes my hair on a side part, but I'm not sure. What do you think? Ginger? Hello?
Hello?
Oh, hey.
Well, don't sound so glad to see me.
Oh, sorry, Miranda. It's just that...
Darren, I thought we agreed that you were going to call me by a pet name from now on.
Right. Sorry, Shmoo.
As Darren tries to explain to his girlfriend that he's worried one of his friends is mad at him because he hurt their feelings, the bell rings and she pushes him up against his locker, saying that he better stop obsessing over Ginger Foutley because he only has room for one woman in his life now. Darren stands there reflecting on the controlling relationship that he's found himself in, and later on we cut to Miranda at clarinet practice while Darren is just kind of sitting nearby watching and bored. He asks her why he had to come along for this, and she says that's just how the whole boyfriend-girlfriend thing operates, and essentially threatens to break up with him if he doesn't like the arrangement.
It's just that I haven't seen a whole lot of Ginger ever since we started dating.
You should thank me for that. Look, I made a lot of sacrifices for this relationship, too. You should have seen the look on Courtney's face today when I told her I couldn't hang out.
Well, maybe we should take a day off. You know, to spend time with our friends.
But that's not really how the whole boyfriend-girlfriend dynamic works. I hate to break it to you.
There are things about this boyfriend-girlfriend dynamic that don't work all right.
Darren continues to argue with Miranda, saying that if he's willing to accept her friends like Courtney, then she should be willing to do the same for him in return. Miranda shouts back at him, saying it's hardly the same thing, but fine. The two continue to escalate further until...
Oh my gosh! Our first fight.
Wow. I guess so.
Now go ahead and leave. But call me later to make up, okay? Because that's what boyfriends and girlfriends do.
Miranda, shh.
Don't speak.
After that, we cut to Ginger's house where she's writing in her journal when Darren shows up at her window for the first time in days. He tries to ask why she's mad, but she continues to give him the silent treatment.
I'm sorry, okay? I guess I just got caught up in all the attention for a minute. But come on, do you have to give me the silent treatment? You know, you blew me off once or twice when Courtney Grippling came knocking, but I never acted like this. I just came by to see if you wanted to hang out with me at the cheese plate factory tomorrow after school. You know, like old times. But I guess not. I guess this is goodbye.
Later on, we cut to the mall where we see Ginger talking to Dodie and Macy about how hard it was to give Darren the cold shoulder. She says that it worked because he did show up, but Dodie argues, saying that it likely wasn't the silent treatment and Darren is her friend and he was gonna show up no matter what. She says that Ginger should at least give him credit for that much. As that's happening, we see Hoodsy and Carl getting smoothies when they spy Mr. Licorice in the window of a pet shop at the mall. He tries his best to hide, but it's no use as they go in to inquire about getting him. They explain the situation to the guy behind the counter, but he says that's total nonsense and that he got Mr. Licorice from his normal supplier. He tells Carl and Hoodsy that they're gonna have to pay for Mr. Licorice if they really want him.
It's hardly enough.
Shame on you, Mr. Licorice. You're Brandon's monkey and you know it.
Oh, on second thought, take him. And quickly!
Later on, we see Courtney and Miranda at a restaurant together, talking their usual gossip and drama over a shared drink. Courtney shares her feelings with Miranda on just how lonely that she's been without her best friend, while Miranda responds by saying,
I'm missing everything! You know, I never had this kind of thought-provoking conversation with Darren.
Speaking of which, we see Darren sitting by himself in the same exact restaurant when Ginger approaches him, asking if she can take a seat. He's fully astounded that she's actually talking to him again.
Sorry I was giving you the silent treatment. It's just that first you dissed me and then...
I didn't diss you, Ginger. I just got a little caught up for a minute, that's all.
I know. I should have given you a chance. But Dr. Fonfeeling said that the...
Oh, you went to see a therapist over this?
Not exactly. She was on Channel 9.
Oh.
Ginger sweetly tells Darren that she really cares about not losing him as a friend, and if that means being supportive of him and Miranda, then she's willing to do that. She puts her hand on his, and right when she does that, Miranda walks up, asking Darren if they can talk for a minute. She grabs him by the arm and walks him over to a phone booth so they can have some privacy.
This isn't working out for me, Darren. And it's not just because of the side part either.
Miranda?
Please, let me finish. Courtney misses me. I'm missing everything. And the truth is, I don't want to have to pretend that I like Ginger Foutley.
So, I guess this is goodbye.
Just so you know, all things considered, you're a pretty good boyfriend.
You aren't bad yourself, Shmoo.
Their moment gets interrupted by Courtney, who drags Miranda away, saying that they need to go get toe jewelry. Darren stands there with a cheesy grin for a moment, and the two girls laugh their way past Ginger and out of the restaurant. Immediately after that, Darren sits right next to Ginger, asking if Dodie and Macy will still accept him back at the lunch table.
Did someone else teach Macy how to rollerblade? Does Dodie still need help with that book report? Did you already have your bedroom window sealed shut?
No, yes, and no, Darren, of course not.
Phew. Because my social calendar is about to really open up.
As the Ginger and Darren portion of the story gets wrapped up nicely, we cut on over to Brandon Higsby's house, where Carl and Hoodsy are returning Mr. Licorice to him. Carl tactfully explains that Mr. Licorice put up a real fight and that he really didn't want to come back. However, Brandon says that he doesn't really care.
Are you listening to me, Brandon? He doesn't like you. Neither do you and Hoodsy, but so what? Don't you see? The monkey is what makes me interesting. Without the monkey, I'm just an annoying little boy.
And with the monkey?
I'm an annoying little boy with a monkey. That's something. You can't hide behind your monkey forever.
Carl instructs Hoodsy to get Mr. Licorice out, and it's quite the struggle to make that happen, but he does. They both comment on how dysfunctional this relationship is, and Carl takes a moment to speak on Mr. Licorice's behalf. He tells Brandon that Mr. Licorice doesn't want to change his life or where he lives. What he wants to change is Brandon.
Me? But I know what's best for Mr. Licorice. Wait, I'm willing to work on this relationship. Just tell me what to do.
Both Carl and Hoodsy explain that he needs to stop micromanaging Mr. Licorice, let him take off the dorky bow tie, and maybe just loosen up a bit. Brandon says that he can definitely do that, but as Carl and Hoodsy leave, we hear what sounds like him going right back to his same old act, trying to brush Mr. Licorice's fur. The two friends exit the house as they agree that Brandon is likely not going to change much, but at least they tried.
Hey, Carl? I know it sounds kind of crazy, but about that juice box, I kind of regret not having tried carrot beet.
Yeah.
You know, I feel that I should be more open to new experiences.
You're pretty open guy.
And taste, too.
I know I said back then, never wanted to see you again, but I was wrong. Baby, I was wrong.
There's a lot here. That was a lot. I don't even know where to start with this one. This episode is one that I've been really waiting to talk with you guys about for a long time now, because, like I said earlier, this one just really hits close to home, and right now, I'm a little overwhelmed realizing that I connect with this episode in many more ways than I thought I did coming into making this video. First of all, just for like a hint of context, as I originally approached my brainstorm for this series of As Told by Ginger videos, I really liked the idea of this specific video focusing mainly on Darren and his coming of age story as it relates to him getting his headgear off and having a big boost in confidence, as well as getting a lot more attention from people for his looks. Essentially, highlighting the progression of him as a character throughout this whole season. However, I realized in actually doing my research and watching this story arc back that it played out a lot different than I remembered it happening. Now, keep in mind that when I approached this brainstorm a long time ago, I hadn't watched this show in years, so it was still a little fuzzy for me. As I had recalled from my childhood though, Darren getting his braces off and dating Miranda, his struggles with his friendship with Ginger, and him getting all this new attention was something that persisted across multiple episodes of this season and not just this one. However, as we saw here, that's certainly not the case. Now, I was able to easily shift my approach here a bit and continue our focus around Darren and Ginger, of course, but the thing is, I was stumped as to why my brain had recalled the series of events differently than it had actually unfolded. The thing is, though, in reflecting, I think I remember this lasting so much longer because in my real life, years after I first saw this, I had a pretty similar experience to Darren. Granted, I never had braces or headgear, but my situation was relatively similar. I grew up as a kid with some low confidence and feeling like I was never really aesthetically pleasing as everyone else around me. Going through that as a kid was incredibly hard, and honestly, looking back at the early 2000s, there wasn't exactly any pieces of media that kids going through that could relate to other than like The Ugly Duckling, which, if we're being honest, stories like that don't exactly come across the best. For me, personally, it was more of like a transition of 7th to 8th grade where I felt like I maybe more blossomed a bit and kind of grew into my body a little bit more and started to feel better about myself, and as a result, I kind of tried to dress myself better too. Of course, as the dominoes fell, this led to a newfound sense of confidence that felt like a breath of fresh air. But looking back on it, I kind of feel like everybody around me could see that confidence on me. I started getting more and more attention from people, kinda like how Darren was in this episode, and that's something that can get very quickly confusing and hard to manage when you're someone like Darren who's just kind of used to being another head in the crowd. I feel like a part of the disconnect that I have with my perceptions of the timeline for this episode and story arc in general is partially due to the fact that when I saw this, I was still that young kid who had very low self-esteem. I wasn't at that age where what happened to Darren had happened to me yet. I remember wishing that would happen to me someday, but at the time I wasn't necessarily able to relate to this episode all too much. I feel like having the memory of this episode in the back of my mind all these years, as well as my own memories of years experiencing a similar situation, kind of resulted in me feeling like Darren getting his headgear off and going through this lasted a lot longer than it really did. Regardless of the time perceptions though, this episode is one that, especially looking back as an adult, is incredibly impactful for me. Seeing Darren go through this really just brings back a lot of old feelings that I haven't thought about in a really long time, and it makes me look back at my life and not necessarily have regrets per se, but it makes me wish that I could go back and talk to young Sean. I wish I could give him a hug, tell him that he's important, everything's gonna be okay, and that someday it's gonna get better. As impactful as this is though, it's interesting to look at how Darren's situation progressed through the eyes of someone who's been through something similar. For Darren, getting that boost of confidence was an instantaneous moment. The orthodontist removing his headgear was an in and out appointment, and as soon as he was walking down the street after it was over, he felt like $1,000,000. It was like he got that headgear off and immediately knew that he looked good. That moment right there was exactly what I had hoped for as a kid. I always wanted that awakening where it was like one big event happened and nothing was ever the same again. However, real life and cartoons are two completely different things. For me personally, this was far from the reality of my experience with growing as a guy. It was, and in some ways it still is, an uphill journey that takes a lot of time. The process of looking in the mirror and finding something that I liked about myself wasn't an instantaneous moment like Darren got. It took time of reflection and searching for that beauty within myself and embracing that inner positivity so that it grows more and more every day. Of course, if I'm being honest, having other people around me notice and make comments about my appearance did leagues for helping my view of myself grow exponentially. But over time, I found that relying on others building up that sense of self is kind of counterproductive. It's incredibly difficult to find happiness within yourself when you can't even love yourself both mentally and physically. I would find myself still having major confidence and body image issues even though people were telling me that I looked good, and the reason for that was because I still hadn't convinced myself that I looked good. Though, of course, the idea of having an instant awakening like Darren did is very appealing, sadly, for almost all of us, it's just not a reality. Another thing that I found hitting very close to home in this episode is the story that happened between Hoodsy and Carl. The message here is an incredibly powerful one, and if I'm being honest, it's one that took me a few times of watching to really grasp what they were putting down. When it comes to the Carl side of these episodes, a lot of times I have trouble taking them seriously because they're usually focused more on the wacky and zany side of things. Like this one, for example. It's about a runaway monkey that they're trying to catch. At first glance, it really seems like a weird side plot, but there's genuinely some incredibly deep meaning behind what happened here if you look at the subcontext with genuine eyes. The message behind Mr. Licorice and his relationship with Brandon was kind of a mixed bag. Mr. Licorice is an adorable little monkey who, on the surface, lives an amazing life. He has everything he could ever want and an owner who loves him. However, it's the way that his owner is just so overbearing and controlling which drives him away. Mr. Licorice isn't even allowed to think for himself, as Brandon, word for word, said that he knows what's best for Mr. Licorice. They obviously have a really dysfunctional relationship, like Carl and Hoodsie pointed out, and you don't have to look too far into the situation to see that. What may have been missed though is how both Carl and Hoodsie were able to see a bit of their own relationship in the one between Brandon and Mr. Licorice. I'm sure that Hoodsie has seen this for a while now, of course, based on how Carl treats him, but this episode would really kind of open Carl's eyes to how he treats Hoodsie and make him realize that he might not appreciate him as much as he should. There are a few moments that point to this. First of all, when Carl points out how dysfunctional the relationship between Brandon and Mr. Licorice is, though Hoodsie agrees, he also essentially says that they don't have much room to talk in that regard. Then, after Carl and Hoodsie both point out what exactly Mr. Licorice is struggling with, they leave. As they leave, Hoodsie admits that he has some regret about not choosing the carrot beet juice box earlier. The thing is, as innocent and random as this comment seems, it comes loaded with quite a bit of context when you think about it. When Brandon gave them the two options, Carl was the first one who responded very offensive at the thought of carrot beet juice. Meanwhile, Hoodsie just kind of echoed his sentiment. This is likely because Hoodsie feels like he can't choose something different from Carl out of fear of being judged by his best friend. There's a good chance that Hoodsie may have tried the carrot beet juice if Carl wasn't so abrasive about it. But the thing is, he feels the need to follow Carl. Not only because Carl pressures him to, but because he's also very abrasive and is likely to not be kind about you making a choice that he himself wouldn't make, regardless of the fact that your choice of drink doesn't affect him even in the slightest. Now, the ending here, though, really symbolizes Carl seeing the error of his ways and realizing that Hoodsie is just as important in this friendship as he is. His opinion matters just as much as Carl's own opinion does. Carl preaching to Brandon Higsby about letting Mr. Licorice have some room to make his own decisions really was kind of the moment that opened Carl's eyes to how he is towards Hoodsie. The ending with them walking down the street and Carl putting his arm over his best friend's shoulder and embracing him was just so amazing, and it was so heartwarming. The interaction that happened between them and Brandon and Mr. Licorice was enough to open Carl's eyes to the fact that him and Hoodsie need one another and are genuinely a good fit to be lifelong friends, as long as Carl is mindful of Hoodsie and his autonomy. One big part that foreshadowed this was what Brandon said about being an annoying little boy with a monkey, and Carl's response about how he can't rely on his monkey forever. Now, obviously the dynamic between Hoodsie and Carl vastly differs from that of Brandon and his pet monkey, but the sentiment still applies here. Being a controlling jerk to your one best friend is enough to push them away from you. Mr. Licorice, who need I stress again is a monkey, would have likely been long gone and found a new home if it weren't for Carl and Hoodsie. The thing is though, Hoodsie on the other hand isn't a monkey. He's a human, and he could very easily up and walk away from this friendship if he woke up one day and realized that he's done putting up with how Carl walks all over him. This ending right here really showed us that Carl realizes all of that, and he's showing that he plans to work on embracing Hoodsie for the awesome guy that he is. What I really love about this ending though, and the biggest reason why I really wanted to take time to focus on the Carl and Hoodsie side of things, is this moral to their story, which can 100% be applied to almost every other character interaction within this episode in some way. For Ginger and Darren, obviously, we see him basically disregard her, as well as Dodie and Macy, because he was so caught up in his newfound fame at school and his love life. As a result, Ginger gave him the cold shoulder, leaving him under the impression that she was walking from that friendship because he wasn't mindful of her feelings. This moral can, of course, also be applied to Darren and Miranda. They fell for one another and started dating, and she completely railroaded his life, planning everything that he does and dictating how he looks and acts. Then, of course, he ends up being pushed away by how controlling she is, and in that case, he didn't break up with her, she broke up with him, but even then, that's an excellent example of autonomy and how any person should have the free will to walk away from any friendship or relationship that they choose. The moral here at the end of the day is that you should respect the people in your life that are important to you, and for me personally, it was important that I touch on how impactful that this is, even though it wasn't necessarily about Ginger and Darren. There's so much more to say about this one, but before I dig deeper into the nitty-gritty, we have to take a second to discuss that ending song. Oh my god, it fit the ending so perfectly. The lyrics to the song just apply so incredibly well to all the stories told in this episode. And in my opinion, this, in conjunction with everything else that we've already covered, really emphasizes just how amazingly the writers of this show were able to tie all of these stories together to make just such a bold and impactful statement as an entire piece of media from start to finish. When we keep in mind Carl and Hoodsey walking down the street as they both happily embrace the change in their friendship, Darren and Miranda sharing a rather bittersweet moment when they break up, as he's left still clearly bubbling with smitten feelings for her. And of course, the overall status of the relationship, or lack thereof, between Ginger and Darren at this point, as we've been following it from the beginning of the series of videos. The song that they wrote for the end of this episode, it just hits so hard.
I know I said back then, never wanted to see you again, but I was wrong. Baby, I was wrong. 9 times out of 10, it seems to happen that I'm wrong. Baby, I'm wrong.
This song just reminds me at its core of growing as a person. It reminds me of coming to a point in your life where you recognize your faults and when you've done wrong. It reminds me of recognizing that it's okay to change your mind and change your opinion after considering another point of view. It reminds me of accepting and forgiving when somebody else changes their point of view and decides that they want to turn a new leaf. It reminds me of admitting that we aren't always correct, and that especially when you're that ugly duckling who's finally growing into his skin, it feels like we're never correct, and we never will be. The biggest thing, though, is the perspective of which the song is coming from. The words being said are coming from the point of view of someone directly talking to the person that they've hurt in the past. This is, without a doubt, extremely impactful, and it invokes those feelings of trying to fix wrongdoings of the past, growing as a person, and putting all of your effort into doing better through the process of just laying your heart out there. For me, as someone who's made an astronomical effort to grow from the person that I used to be, this song just really hits so close to home. Furthermore though, on the note of things that hit really close to home, hearing this song on the heels of that Carl and Hoodsey ending really just hit me so hard. And it honestly reminds me a lot of one specific friend that I used to have when I was really young. He's the kind of person who's always had a very strong and abrasive personality. I genuinely have so many cherished childhood memories of spending time with this guy and just doing cool stuff together, and I still have a lot of love for this person, but sadly, a lot of those memories are soured by some sort of negativity that he would find a way to bring into the mix. In a way, this song kind of bums me out because we never really had that moment that Carl and Hoodsey had where we kind of come to accept each other and change for the better of our friendship. I mean, we're on good speaking terms and we talk once in a blue moon, but it just makes me a little sad in hindsight because I would have loved to had the opportunity to maybe see his point of view a little more and maybe had mine seen as well, but when you're a kid, especially a young boy. Sometimes sharing your emotions and being vulnerable is a really hard thing to do. As it relates to this episode, it did make my heart really happy to see Carl and Hoodsie reach the point that they reached by the end of this one, especially considering that it was approached in such a tactful way. There wasn't a big blow up where Hoodsie had to give Carl the silent treatment or anything like that. It was just as simple as Carl studying the relationship between Brandon and his pet monkey and seeing too many similarities within himself. That moment of realization was a really enjoyable thing to digest, and it genuinely sparked a lot of joy for me as someone who's now coming to realize that this is exactly the moment that I wanted to have with my best friend when I was a little kid. Looking back at this episode, it makes my mind circle back to one of the biggest reasons why I love this show, and that would be the representation. It doesn't matter what hard thing that you've been through in your life, odds are somewhere in the series you'll find at least one episode that will truly stick with you and hit very close to home. This one right here, through and through, was my episode, and I'll admit that it's really therapeutic to get the chance to reflect on that here on top of the process of realizing that this one really resonated with me a lot more than I originally thought that it did. Outside of my own personal perceptions and connections with this episode though, there's genuinely still just so much more to go over. Going in a bit of a different direction, I have to give so much praise to this show for its sense of continuity. That's something we touched on previously in talking about this show. However, as the seasons would continue, this is something that they would seemingly double down on, and not really in a bad way. In this episode alone, we would see so many mentions of past events. There was Carl mentioning him and Hoodsie solving the dog napper case last summer. We would see Courtney mentioning her crush on Will Patterson, and of course her also mentioning Darren and Miranda's summer camp experience, all of which were references to episodes last season. My favorite part though was that part in the beginning where Dodie acknowledges Ginger falling for Darren in the past, which of course would be a reference to the episode Dare I Darren. The overall act of them embracing the continuity in this show affirms to us as viewers that things in the past are still relevant to what's happening now, and they definitely aren't to be forgotten. I will admit though, I did get a little frustrated when Macy said that the situation between Darren and Ginger was underwhelming for them as spectators. I mean, if we look back at that episode, Macy and Dodie were both completely opposed to Ginger and Darren dating due to how it would affect their friend group. Macy was literally in tears over it if I recall correctly. Honestly, I find it really annoying to hear Macy talk about how lackluster it was now when both her and Dodie were a big part as to why it went the way that it did. They were completely unsupportive of Ginger's feelings for Darren, so for them to be frustrated that they didn't get some sort of show out of it just doesn't really make sense at all. Continuing on with this episode though, we definitely have to take a second to talk about Courtney. It's interesting for me to think about Courtney as a character, especially in the context of where we're at in the show right now. Of course, we're going at this chronologically. We started with Season 1, this video is Season 2, and Season 3 will likely be spread across 2 really long videos because we need to talk about pretty much the entire season. But we're still early on and I'm keeping that in mind as I analyze these episodes. However, my comment section on the other hand is a completely different page. People down there talking about Courtney in the long run, and I'm like, guys, stop. You're going too far ahead. You're skipping a couple videos ahead of me now. When I talk about Courtney's character, I'm talking about the right now as we're digesting it together and the past episodes that we've already covered in my videos here. Plus, she's gonna get her time in the spotlight. We're gonna have plenty of time to dig into Courtney in the near future, don't you worry at all. As it specifically pertains to this episode though, her role is honestly kind of confusing and I feel like this was done on purpose. early on in this one, we hear Courtney saying that she hopes Ginger doesn't take it too personally when she gets a lot less time with Darren. Now, this statement came across very ambiguously. As viewers, we're left wondering if Courtney meant this to be as antagonizing as it came out of her mouth, or if she's just not really policing her tone at all, because it's just her and Miranda thinking that they're having a private conversation. I mean, if we keep in mind some of Courtney's odd actions in the last video, like how she saved Ginger from a ton of embarrassment in science class with Ian Richton, yet still seems to kind of want to bully Ginger by pressuring her into making out with the French foreign exchange student while simultaneously shaming her, it's kind of hard to get a read on Courtney. I have a feeling though that there's a part of Courtney that is genuine in hoping Ginger doesn't feel bad, because if you watch closely, after Courtney says that, Miranda actually waits for her to fully leave the bathroom before she says anything bad about Ginger. Now, this could mean a few things, of course. It could be because Miranda doesn't fully trust Courtney as far as Ginger is concerned. She might be fearing that if Courtney hears her saying something like that about Ginger, Courtney might give Ginger a warning because maybe Courtney genuinely likes her. Then again though, it could have just been a well-timed coincidence. I mean, it is pretty ironic when you think about it. Courtney said what she said about Ginger not taking it personally, but then when exactly what she prophesized happens to Courtney herself as well, she takes it very personally. I mean, ultimately it doesn't matter if Courtney really meant what she said about Ginger taking it personally or not, because it doesn't make much of a difference. It's not like she cared enough to tell Miranda not to do that. It's not like Courtney would have tried to do literally anything to help preserve Darren and Ginger's friendship. In all reality, Courtney didn't care about Ginger's time with Darren being messed with. She only started to care when her own personal time with Miranda was infringed upon. This ultimately does an amazing job of highlighting just how mindlessly selfish that Courtney is down to her core. I'll admit that there have been times when she came through for Ginger and was the only one to come through for her, such as the science class situation last season, but it still has to be said that at this point in the series, Courtney's true colors are genuinely hard to read, and I'm pretty sure that's done on purpose. Honestly guys, I can't wait for the videos I'm planning about Courtney. I'm thinking like a 3 or 4 part series kind of similar to what I'm doing here with Ginger and Darren, but instead focusing on Courtney and Ginger. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Moving along from there though, I definitely want to talk about how much of a total fraud that Dr. Fond Feelings is. Like, this lady straight up goes around peddling her patented silent treatment method to people. There's just so much wrong here. It's spun like this person couldn't get the time of day from someone, so they gave that person the silent treatment and now they're irresistible all of a sudden? I mean, it's pretty clear that this is obviously a parody of some lame daytime talk show, but man, can you imagine someone passing this off as legit advice? Like, if someone isn't giving you what you deem as an equitable amount of attention for you to thrive in a relationship, or just not giving you any attention whatsoever or acknowledging your existence, it's probably time to analyze that relationship and how much it's really benefiting you, or if that person is the right fit for you. Or, you know, even easier, just tell them how you feel? I mean, completely shutting that person out and not sharing your feelings in an effort to get what you want is just really kind of toxic and gross. That leaves the person you're mad at not only likely confused as to why you're mad in the first place, but also as to what it is that they could be doing to help fix the situation. This show portraying that is one thing that I kind of disagree with, because in Ginger giving Darren the silent treatment and that being the thing that he finally responds to, they were more or less trying to teach kids that doing that is a valid way of getting someone's attention. The thing is though, if someone you like isn't reciprocating those feelings, doing something toxic to try to coerce them into feeling those feelings isn't going to result in a healthy relationship at all. There's likely always going to be some deep-rooted issues that aren't resolved because instead of talking through these issues, you're choosing to throw a fit until you get what you want. Now, by all means, if you've tried talking it through and that didn't have any effect, explore some more extreme avenues. But like, Dr. Fawn Feelings is preaching to go extreme right out the gate before you even share how you feel. I personally just have so much disdain for the act of having a problem with something, but instead of saying something or doing something about it, just being passive aggressive towards the person you're mad at, and expecting them to not only notice but to connect the dots without you even giving them a word. There's just so many mixed messages here. Ginger using toxic means to make Darren feel bad when he's neglecting his friends, then her apologizing for it because he throws out the excuse that he was just caught up in everything. I mean, it's just such a hairy situation when we consider that him neglecting his true friends once he gained a bit of popularity was the root cause of the issue here.
Sorry I was giving you the silent treatment. It's just that first you dissed me and then...
I didn't diss you, Ginger. I just got a little caught up for a minute, that's all.
I know. I should have given you a chance.
I mean, he's right. He didn't diss her, but he was still a crummy friend, and that he should definitely apologize for. His actions in the first place were what made Ginger react the way that she did. I'll admit that her reaction wasn't conducive to a positive and healthy dialogue between the two at all. But with that being said, it's frustrating that in this part, it's basically spun that Darren is the victim here, and Ginger is the only one who needs to be apologizing. If anything, they should both probably be apologizing to one another. Furthermore though, there's one huge problematic thing here within this interaction that rubbed me the wrong way harder than anything else did.
Dr. Fawn Feelings said that the...
Oh, you went to see a therapist over this?
Not exactly. She was on Channel 9.
Oh.
I really don't want to lose you as a friend, Darren, and if that means being supportive of you and Shmoo, I'm ready to do that.
Now, first things first, her bringing up Dr. Fawn Feelings and him almost being exciting at the idea of her seeing a therapist over him is just the embodiment of the heart and soul of narcissism. It's so disgustingly uncool that he feels some sort of accomplishment at the thought of her seeking a therapist to deal with how he's being towards her. You shouldn't be proud of the fact that your actions led someone to go to therapy. To be fair, I imagine that he's probably excited because that would mean he's really important to her, since his actions have such a drastic effect on her life. But again, he shouldn't be proud of the idea of pushing her to that point. If anything, if he did ask that question and she said that she did go see a therapist over this whole ordeal, that should be Darren's cue to kind of take this a bit more seriously and be more careful of how he treats Ginger, because it's evident that he's really important to her and that his actions really do affect her. Granted, that isn't the case and she didn't go see a therapist over this. It was just so icky to see Darren react the way that he did just at that idea being put in his mind. Lastly, as it pertains to this episode, we certainly have to touch on Miranda and Darren. Their relationship was just so toxic, and it really seemed like a miserable one from an outsider's perspective. I couldn't help but chuckle at that scene in the phone booth at the end when Miranda tells Darren that he was a good boyfriend, and he responds saying that she wasn't that bad herself. I mean, I get why he said that in response, because, you know, the chemistry and the heat of the moment and the flirting and stuff, but man was that a lie, because she was an awful and controlling girlfriend. Like, this girl's perceptions of how boyfriend-girlfriend relationships are supposed to work is completely screwed up. By all means, that relationship is gonna look different for every individual couple, of course, but like her saying that they aren't allowed to be apart from each other or see their friends anymore because that's just how this thing works was just so controlling and weird. It was kind of funny though, taking in the look on his face after she walks away. You can tell plain as day that he's still completely smitten with her, even though she's very clearly not good for him. This right here is such a hard one, and is oddly enough yet another way that I find myself relating to this episode in a way that I didn't realize that I did. It's a tough situation to be in when you know good and well that someone you've caught feelings for is really bad and toxic for you, but those feelings are just so hard to overcome. Especially when you're in middle school, going through puberty, and not used to getting attention from anyone like that. I've been there, and it sucks. It sucks having someone walk all over you and treat you like garbage, but still wanting to be there because it feels so good to finally have someone notice you in that way, even if it's someone who's going to completely tear you apart in the process. In Miranda's defense specifically though, I do want to give her a bit of credit because she actually did like Darren before he got his braces off. We saw this firsthand in the episode Season of Caprice when they went to camp together. The two end up getting close and you can definitely feel the chemistry between them, but it doesn't go anywhere yet. Unfortunately though, minus respect points because though she did like him, she is so shallow that she didn't want to date him until the point where she saw him as aesthetically acceptable for her personal image. I will say, I think that adds to my disappointment a bit in feeling this way about Darren and Miranda's relationship. When I reflect on watching Season of Caprice and seeing them connect for the first time, it really made me want to see their relationship unfold in a healthy way. The two of them relating to one another over the things that they did really made it seem like the pairing could have had made for a healthy relationship that had the potential to heal the both of them mutually. Sadly though, that definitely would not be the case. Looking back on the entirety of this episode, though it was admittedly a mixed bag of feelings and at times semi-controversial messages, it's still an episode that was thoroughly enjoyable from start to finish, and it's one that is really important to me. This episode feels like such a perfect way to continue where Season 1 left off. Starting off with that iconic moment of Darren getting his braces off and his character changing from this point on really made this such an iconic episode. On top of that though, it gave us a further look into Darren and Ginger's rather confusing love lives, but that's essentially the biggest bit of context that Season 2 would give us as far as the continuation of the relationship between two of them goes. Much like Season 1 though, there would be many episodes that would shine just such a great light on Ginger's love life, and add further context to her character, as well as influence the ultimate development of her feeling towards Darren. Next up, we're looking at an episode that really would change our view on Ginger's perception of herself and would also give us a peek at how heavily that can be influenced by the actions of those around her. We're talking about none other than Fast Reputation.
What's taking so long? Looks like the school assembly's a hot ticket. Mind if I cut Ginger? You're so nice.
Sorry, ladies. Last seats just went. Standing room only.
Looks like nice girls finish last.
As Ginger and her friends stand at the back of the auditorium, Principal Milty takes the stage to bring the assembly to a start. He announces that a handful of junior high students have been spotted over the last few weeks hanging out at The Wall, which is a popular hangout spot over at the high school nearby. He explains that since it's off-school grounds, it's against the rules for them to go there, and that any kids caught there will be subject to suspension.
Maybe you should try spending some time there, Ginger. Then we wouldn't have to see you for a few days.
And break school rules? Oh, nonsense, Miranda. Ginger's a nice girl.
As that's happening, we cut over to the elementary school where Carl and Hoodsy's teacher is talking to her class about elective classes, which they will be picking today for the first time. She stresses that these classes are meant to fuel your interests and that they should pick what they want to learn and not just choose whichever electives their friends are going with.
Cooking! Why not modern dance or pole vaulting? You know, an area where we stand to shine.
'Cause cooking is where all the big bucks are. You learn a few crummy recipes, instant franchise. I'm talking cable TV shows, bottled sauce, signature steak knives, the whole shebang.
Carl continues to go on saying that everyone and their mother is getting in on the new wave of chef franchises, and that the market has a need for two young boys to sweep in and wow everyone with their amazing cooking skills. A while later, we see Ginger and her classmates running laps on the track outside during PE when we get our first glimpse at The Wall, which just so happens to be right on the other side of the fence from the track that they're running on. The teenagers all stand around with their bizarre early 2000s fashion styles and awkward, still growing in facial hair as some of them stare weirdly at the kids running nearby. Ginger and her friends are talking about what Mipsy, Courtney, and Miranda meant when they were saying how nice that Ginger is.
They said nice, but what they meant was uncool.
Dorky.
Losers. I bet he could wear it.
That's Jake, 10th grade. And anyone with a pierced eyebrow wouldn't be caught dead in petroleum-based action wear.
Those leaners are totally into him.
Leaders? Those cool girls he's talking to.
Right. Cool. Not nice.
Dodie seems very surprised that a nice girl like Ginger would be interested in a cool guy like Jake, but Ginger says that she can lean too. As the PE teacher blows her whistle, beckoning the girls back to jogging their laps, Ginger is conflicted about these feelings.
I don't know. I'm thinking about hanging at the wall.
We cut to the next day, where we see Ginger and her friends getting off of the bus in the morning as they prepare to walk into school. Ginger told them that she's actually contemplating going over to the wall to hang out, and both Dodie and Macy are losing their minds at the thought of it, really questioning if it's worth it for Ginger to risk getting in more trouble and damaging her reputation forever. Ginger argues, saying that their reputations are already damaged, being labeled as dweebs, and just at that simple point, Dodie is immediately on board with Ginger and practically wanting to join her at the wall.
Are you saying hanging, cold chilling, or maxing and relaxing at the wall are worth being suspended over?
Well, no.
Ginger, I hate to dredge up a painful memory, but you do have a pre-existing criminal record from when you got busted for trying to steal. So technically, you've already proven you're not a nice girl.
Dodie says that the whole theft situation was a long time ago and that people forget water under the bridge. Wanting to kind of walk the line, Dodie suggests that instead they just pass by the wall on their way home after school today. But Ginger says that she can't because she has a dentist appointment today and her mom is coming to pick her up. Not long after that, we cut over to the elementary school where we see Carl and Hoodsy at their first day of cooking class.
And up until recently, I was proud chef and owner of Chez Maison, the renowned French eatery.
What happened?
Sometimes adults need new challenges.
Chapter 11, am I right?
The culinary arts teacher explains that the competition was brutal, but the real issue was the cooking channel, which has every average Joe convinced that they can make anything they want just because they saw it on TV. She chops it up to her loss being the children's gain, and Carl grins considering that's exactly what he's baking on. A while later, we see Ginger at her dentist appointment waiting in the waiting room when, out of nowhere, Jake from the wall shows up with one of his friends. The two talk about a crazy party that some of Will Patterson's friends have planned and how it's supposed to be a real rager. Ginger tries to hide behind a magazine nearby, hoping that they don't notice her, but that doesn't last long.
Time for your cleaning, Ginger. Though I doubt it'll be necessary.
Later that night, we see Ginger talking on the phone with Dodie and Macy, telling them about how humiliated she is being known as the nice girl with the clean mouth of the month. Dodie essentially suggests that Ginger should do something about it, as she says that they should just crash the party that all of the high school kids are having this week.
Dodie, it's brilliant! If by brilliant you mean supremely irresponsible, I would have to agree.
You'll make yourself cool. Reinvent your image to Jake, and all without risking suspension by hanging at the wall.
How do you figure that math?
Because only someone cool enough to stand at the wall would dare crash a party.
I don't know. A party at a school night?
Later that night, we see Ginger walking into the kitchen, asking her mother what's for dinner, but she's shocked when her mom responds by telling her to ask her brother because he's the one cooking tonight. Carl starts going off about how they haven't lived until they've sampled his feet loaf with trashed potatoes and fried bunions.
Well, it doesn't smell bad.
No, not bad at all. Load me up, Cookie Foot. After all, what's life without taking chances? I gotta be honest with you, kid. This stuff is great. You could fry my bunions anytime.
Slam dunk!
As Ginger reflects on her mom saying, "What's life without taking chances?" we immediately cut to the party that night. Ginger is leading Dodie and Macy towards the gate, and she tells them that if anyone asks, they're in 9th grade. She also instructs them to completely avoid Will Patterson at all costs. The party seems to be pretty poppin', as we see a full-blown DJ with a stage set up and a bunch of people dancing and having a great time.
I heard the safest place to hang these things is at the food table. That way, if you don't want to talk or dance, you can always eat.
What do we do now?
Just try to act like we belong.
Right. Maybe no one will notice that we don't.
Hours pass, and we see the girls not moving from their spot and not even talking to a single person. Ginger starts to get kinda sad, saying that their plan isn't working and that she hasn't seen Jake anywhere. Dodie points out that their moms probably aren't gonna buy them being out doing research this late, so they all mutually decide that it's time to go home. On the way out, Macy, being the self-proclaimed den mother that she is, suggests that they all do a quick key check, and thankfully so, because Ginger realizes that she lost her house keys probably near the snack table, considering they didn't move from that spot at all. She goes back inside while her friends wait for her, and right at that exact time, there's a slow romantic song playing through the DJ booth as people are slow dancing. Ginger rushes over to the table and doesn't see her keys anywhere, so she gets on her hands and knees and goes crawling underneath the table looking for them.
Ow! Ugh!
Hey, it's Clean Mouth of the Month. What are you doing under the snack table?
I lost my keys.
Got that beat. I lost my nachos. Too much crowd surfing on a full stomach.
Oh, I better go.
So, what's your name again?
Ginger.
Ginger goes outside and meets her friends who've been waiting for her, and she tells them about how she bumped into Jake under the table, leaving out the fine details of what was said and what exactly happened. She just says that he was cool and she freaked out, and they just kind of leave it at that. The next day, we see Carl and Hoodsy at school with their food cart set up outside. Blake Grippling comes up and, as per usual, he questions what they're doing, but when he tries Carl's food, he admits that it's actually really good.
You parked your cart on our first base at... Wow, this stuff looks a whole lot better than what Chef Bob's slinging. Give me some of that mac and sneeze!
Over at the middle school, Ginger and her friends are running on the track yet again as they talk about how great it was going to that party last night, even though Ginger lost her keys. Dodie gets really excited over the fact that Jake actually talked to her, but Ginger is quick to dismiss Dodie's excitement.
I can't even remember.
Yo, Ginger! Found your house keys.
Thanks.
Kinda like when Cinderella left her house keys, right?
I, thought it was a glass slipper.
I'm not really into literature.
Ginger takes her keys back, and Jake says that he'll see her at the next party as they both go their separate ways. Courtney and Miranda approach Ginger, very shocked that she seems to know Jake, as they considered high school guys to be way out of Ginger's league. She explains to them that they crashed the high school party last night, and Courtney freaks out a bit, seeming to get mad at Miranda because she wanted to crash that party last night, but Miranda said no because it was a school night.
Ginger, how did he get your keys?
He must have found them under the snack table after our tete-a-tete.
Tete-a-tete?
You were with him under the snack table?
For like 2 seconds. Case closed, okay?
Ginger, you're keeping something from us.
Case closed.
Miranda, make her talk!
Gotta run, guys. Literally.
After that, we cut over to the elementary school kitchen where Chef Bob is talking to the boys' homeschool teacher about how they're infringing upon his elementary school contract because kids aren't wanting to buy his food now that Hoodsy and Carl are serving food at school. Carl argues, telling Miss Gordon that she's the one who told them to pick a subject that they're interested in.
That didn't mean to put Chef Bob out of business.
How unfortunate when teachers fail to nurture the obvious gifts of their students.
I still don't understand how you two could draw such business simply with gross-out names for your dishes.
It's the name that draws them in, but it's the taste that keeps them.
Mrs. Gordon threatens to take this up with a higher authority if the boys don't shut their cart down, but when she tastes Carl's food, she suddenly remembers a clause in Chef Bob's contract concerning outside vendors and the encouragement of some healthy competition.
Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't a job. It's a calling.
Because if you drown the whole dish in dressing, Bob, then you missed the point.
There's more than one way to shut down them kids.
Out on the playground, Carl and Hoodsy's line is packed and growing by the minute, leaving Hoodsy spread rather thin by himself behind the grill. As they continue to serve, Courtney and Miranda walk up, hoping to get some info from Carl about what happened between his sister and Jake. But when Jake himself walks by, Miranda decides that they should bypass the kid and go right to the guy himself. They walk up and pretty directly ask him about the situation.
We heard Ginger Feltley crashed a party you were at last night.
Oh, yeah. Clean mouth.
Clean mouth? What's that supposed to mean?
Except it was so dark I could, barely make out her pearly whites, you know?
Did he say make out?
Courtney, being confused, questions Ginger's fashion choice of wearing pearly white, having clearly misunderstood what Jake meant. Meanwhile, Miranda just can't contain her excitement to share this gossip with Mipsy and use it to drag Ginger down further than ever before.
But Miranda, do you think it's right to just trash Ginger's rep?
Are you kidding? It's our duty! Out of my way, girlfriend! This piece of gossip is too hot to keep cold!
We then fast forward to later on in the lunchroom, where Ginger is in line with her friends. Dodie is excitedly telling her about how word is getting out really quickly, and Ginger already has a rep. Just then, though, things come crashing in an instant when Mipsy walks by, saying how she heard that Ginger had quite the night last night.
Looks like bad girls finish first.
Oh, did you hear the way she said that?
Ginger, remember when you were complaining about her calling you nice?
Ah, how the winds have shifted.
It's a positive sign, if you ask me.
From there, we cut to Ginger walking the halls of the school. With every locker she passes comes another handful of kids turning their heads and staring at her, all clearly speculating about what Ginger did with Jake last night. Ginger ends up going to the bathroom in hopes of finding peace, but even in there, she finds two girls who are clearly talking about her. Ginger hides in a stall where she finds some graffiti on the wall about her and Jake. She ends up overhearing them say that Ginger made out with the sleazy dude from the wall last night, and that for some reason he ended up with her house keys, which of course causes even more speculation from them.
Ginger, we know you're in there.
We recognize your characteristic triple flush.
Oh, guys, what they're saying isn't true. I never made out with Jake.
We believe you, Ginger. It's just that we're having a hard time getting other people to believe you.
Fast.
The next morning, we see Ginger with her mom and brother in the kitchen as they're all getting ready to begin their day. Ginger is confiding in her mother and hoping for some advice, saying that all she did was crash a party, and now everybody is saying really nasty and hurtful things about her. She says she's really worried about going to school today because she knows that everyone is going to have more to say about her, and she doesn't even have the first idea of what to say back to them.
Rubber glue, back to you.
Hey, that's not bad. Sometimes that kid's wise beyond his years.
Rubber glue back to you? That is so elementary school.
Ginger, think about it. You don't have to explain anything to anyone.
I don't?
No, why should you? Let him talk. Rubber glue back to you.
Yeah, you're right. Let them think what they want to think.
Ginger and her mom share a nice hug as she thanks her for the guidance, and just like that, we cut over to Carl and Hoodsy, who are in the middle of a massive rush at their food cart. Out of nowhere, a man dressed in business casual attire with a clipboard walks up, causing Carl to get way too excited. Carl hops the counter and approaches the man, asking if he's with the food channel and there to offer them a sweet deal. But sadly, this guy is pretty quick to burst his bubble.
I'm with the health department, boys, and I'm here to shut you down.
Boy, Carl, you weren't even close.
Shut us down? But what we do?
No food protector, hair nets or gloves, meats stored with dairy. Not to mention, this operation is a breeding ground for germs. By order of the health department, this cart is hereby permanently closed.
All of the kids walk away disappointed that they have to go back to cafeteria food. And on that note, we cut over to the lunchroom at Lucky Junior High, where Ginger is sitting with her friends talking about Carl and Hoodsy's food cart getting shut down.
Carl says that now his reputation is also ruined, so I guess it runs in the family.
Let people think what they want to think, right?
Or let people think what you wanted them to think. Right, Ginger?
I guess. But Macy, I wanted them to think I was someone cool enough to crash a high school party, not someone who rolls around under picnic tables with 10th grade boys.
As they continue this conversation, which, might I add, features all sorts of awful mouth noises as the characters continue to eat through their words the whole time, Dodie points out that she was there at the party as well, didn't even come close to any boys, and it didn't even do a single thing for her reputation. It's still just as flat as it was before. Just then though, as the girls share a good laugh, Courtney and Miranda approach.
I'm glad those ugly rumors about you have finally been put to rest. Word is Jake has a girlfriend, and it's not you.
Surprise.
Then Courtney does something that would shock everyone. She apologizes genuinely to Ginger for contributing to those nasty rumors, taking accountability for her actions and realizing just how awful of a thing that was to do. In a really surprising moment, she gets pretty honest and vulnerable with Ginger right in front of everyone.
Perhaps I was a little jealous. I mean, it was bad enough you crashed a party I didn't.
It was a school night, okay?
But it was Trey annoying being pushed out of the limelight, if only for a minute. I was starting to feel like I didn't even know you.
Actually, for a minute there, I don't think I even knew myself.
Must have been the best minute of your life.
Rubber glue back to you, Miranda.
Man, you guys, this episode really had so many strong messages behind it, and it definitely did its fair share of taking us on a wild roller coaster of emotions. I do have to commend this episode first of all for its amazing job of continuing and building upon some more of those themes that we saw persist through season 1. Specifically, Ginger not feeling good enough being herself, not feeling experienced enough, or feeling the need to be someone that she isn't in order to gain acceptance from the popular girls, hoping to find some more self-worth in the process through their validation. There's a lot more to say about that, and we're certainly going to break that down pretty far, but before we do, one other thing I caught that was a callback to season 1 was Macy bringing up Ginger having a criminal record for theft. This is actually a reference to the first episode of the show, which we're certainly going to be checking out in a future video. It's a pretty spicy one. I really appreciate the references here though, especially knowing where this video is going from here in the next few episodes that we're going to cover. Right now it's small tidbits of referencing season 1, but hold on to your seat because spoiler alert, later on in this video we are coming full circle and it's a lot. Now, moving on from here though, kind of taking things in chronological order, I definitely have to talk about Jake. This guy just screams sleazeball. This teenager is just standing here against the wall, staring at little kids who are exercising, and huffing Sharpie ink. Like, what the hell, dude? What's your problem, man? Either this guy's a total weirdo, or he just completely lacks the self-awareness to realize how odd this looks. Given our introduction, I'm sure none of us are surprised that this dude is pretty much flirting with kids that are still in middle school, and it's just weird, man. Now, before I dive a little bit more into Jake, kind of piggybacking off of what happens next after our initial introduction to Jake, we totally have to talk about the symbolism behind Ginger standing there thinking about hanging out at the wall. When we see her look down and see her reflection in a puddle as a flower falls, landing on it and causing her reflection to completely dissipate. This right here perfectly embodies the artistic spirit of this show that drew me in and keeps me coming back. The symbolism here is just incredible. On all levels, this here is just such a loaded message disguised as a simple transition scene. This embodies Ginger thinking about becoming something that she's not to please people who don't care about her and never will. It boldly shows us her reflecting on who she is as a person and how people perceive her. When the flower comes down from above, causing her to lose sight of her reflection, there's not very many ways that we can look at this, but there are many different analogies and words that we can use to describe essentially the same message. I like to imagine the flower representing her inner self and her innocence in general being called into question. I mean, Ginger is a very flowers, ponies, and the color pink kind of girl. To me, flowers are an excellent metaphor for Ginger's inner self. I see this scene where the flower comes down and it's almost like fate saying, what's it gonna be, Ginger? Are you gonna remain the person that you know you are deep down? Or are you gonna do something out of character to prove to people who don't care about you and never will that you aren't as innocent as they think you are? I ultimately love the symbolism here, and this scene just captured so many feelings in a really perfect way. Now, expanding a little bit more on Jake though, there's just so much about this guy that's truly deplorable. First of all, like we touched on already, him being creepy towards little girls that are years younger than him, but also with the context that we're given at the end, finding out that he has a girlfriend. I mean, you're telling me that we've been watching this sleazeball flirting with Ginger to the point that they have full-blown both leaned in for a kiss under the table at a party, and if that wasn't bad enough, all of this at the expense of hurting some other girl's feelings. I mean, I guess we shouldn't be surprised that the guy preying on prepubescent girls is also a cheater in all reality, but like, man, Lasky Chupo did an amazing job of painting red flag central all over this character. On top of all that though, did anyone else notice how gross it was that Ginger leaned in to kiss this guy fresh after him vomiting and straight up telling her that he lost his nachos? I mean, his last sentence was saying that he threw up, and seconds later, without another word, they're almost kissing. I just can't handle the timing of all this. Ginger, I can excuse because she's straight up a 12-year-old little girl. But this teenager, on the other hand, is just a complete dumpster fire of a human. Speaking of dumpster fires, though, we have to talk about that moment when Courtney and Miranda go on their whole drama spree of finding out what happened between Ginger and Jake. It's very evident at this point that Miranda has negative intentions, as she's not even trying to hide them. But Courtney, on the other hand, just seems confused by what's going on. Jake says pearly whites, talking about Ginger's teeth, but Courtney is on another planet thinking he's talking about Ginger's fashion choices. She's fixated on Ginger's choice of accessories and what she was wearing, while Miranda is looking for deeper meaning in everything that this guy is saying. Also, huge thanks to Jake for his absolutely abysmal wording. Saying make out her pearly whites definitely didn't pour fuel on Miranda's already raging drama fire. Then, of course, we have to bring up that part where Courtney questions if what Miranda was planning is the right thing to do. This was kind of our first real glimpse at Courtney actually, full-blown showing consideration for Ginger. I mean, we saw her save Ginger from embarrassment during science class with Ian Richton last season like we talked about earlier, but this instance feels a lot different from that. This isn't Courtney doing it to Ginger's face, this is her actually sticking up for Ginger behind her back. Kind of. It felt like a huge moment, and for us as viewers, I'm sure a lot of us noticed that Courtney is starting to think more about how her actions affect Ginger, meanwhile also noting that Miranda really treats Ginger badly without any good reason. It kind of felt like one of those moments where Courtney was stopping to think, why are we doing this? Which really does say a lot about the dynamic between the two of them and how much it's changing. In the beginning, we saw a lot of Courtney not really caring about Ginger and kind of using her as a pawn for entertainment, like in the episode with her and Jean-Pierre on the ski lift. Then, of course, Camp Caprice would grow Courtney further, and now it feels like at this moment, we're starting to see more of her being able to think for herself and genuinely have an ounce of mindfulness towards other people. We're going to circle back to this in a little bit as we approach the ending of this episode, but in the meantime, we definitely have to touch on the dynamic between Miranda and Mipsy. These two are a very dangerous combination. We saw that in the episode Dare I Darren in Season 1, where they made a comment to Ginger about her and Darren making a cute couple, and it completely rocked Ginger's world for a bit, leaving her very confused. The messed up thing about them, though, is that it seems regardless of their obviously negative intentions, Ginger still wants to please them for some reason, even though she will literally never be able to. I mean, they talk bad about her when she's nice, they talk bad about her when she's bad, they shame her for finishing last, and if she's anything but last, then they shame her for finishing first, when, of course, those same things they're hurling accusations about could probably be said about them as well. Ultimately, Ginger could never win with Miranda or Mipsy. She's never going to have their respect or win them over as friends, and the sooner she realizes that, the better. On a related note though, I rolled my eyes so incredibly hard when Mipsy made that comment about how bad girls finish first, and Dodie told Ginger that's a positive thing. This right here, if we didn't already have it, cemented our understanding nicely and firmly that Dodie is rather socially inept and very tone deaf. I mean, she doesn't even realize when someone is talking smack unless they're throwing out blatant words. She fails to see past face value statements and look into deeper meaning behind what Mipsy was saying to realize what she was actually implying. Either that, or I guess she's the kind of person who thinks that any publicity is good publicity, even if it's the whole school dragging you and saying cruel things that aren't true. On another note, touching on Ginger's best friends, we certainly need to talk about how Macy was the responsible one here, and it kind of gave me a mixed bag of conflicting feelings. On one hand, I feel like she didn't get enough credit, but on the other hand, I feel like she didn't approach the situation in a very conductive way. I mean, she's the one who had the foresight to think that maybe this was all a bad idea for Ginger to begin with. Furthermore, when Mipsy made that comment about bad girls finishing first, Macy said something about how the winds have shifted. Now, this, on face value, I took as Macy making a random comment like she does pretty frequently, but on a deeper level, this very well could be her subtly noting the consequences of Ginger's actions, and her having to bear it as a result of messing with people's perception of her reputation by doing something drastically out of character. With that being said though, I could be reading too far into that moment. However, if that comment wasn't her trying to say that Ginger was getting what she asked for by playing with fire, then her saying, "Let people think what you wanted them to think, right, Ginger?" certainly was. I gotta admit, this one really rubs me the wrong way. Macy saying that, and especially Ginger's response to her saying that, tells us that all along, Macy thought that this was about getting attention from 10th grade boys. When, in all reality, like Ginger said, for her, it was about being known as someone who's cool enough to crash a high school party. Don't get me wrong, I like that, for the most part, Macy has good intentions and morals, but in cases like this, it really does come across like it's from the perspective of a high horse. Like, as much as I love her, so what, Macy? What if this was about Ginger wanting more attention from boys? Is that a problem for you? Are you gonna shame your best friend like everyone else was just because she might want to be different than you? By all means, I understand her maybe trying to say like, hey, you might want to go for somebody closer to our age than some creep who's way older, but still, I feel like Macy probably could have worded things a little better here. It honestly hurts my soul a little bit. If there's anything that you should know about me if you don't already, it's that I'm the kind of person who wholeheartedly endorses people living their life the way they see fit without judgment, as long as they aren't hurting anyone, abusing anybody, or causing damage along the way. I mean, I want to be able to make my own decisions in life and live how I like to live, and I don't want anyone encroaching on that or judging me for my lifestyle. On that note, I'd never judge someone else just because they do things differently than I do and have their own lifestyle that they like to live. I mean, nobody likes that kind of judgmental person. Hearing Macy imply things like this really leads me to wonder if maybe she's a bit of a wolf in sheep's clothing, so to speak, in the sense that she is Ginger's friend, but she has a lot of opinions disapproving of how Ginger chooses to live her life that she tends to hide and let slip every once in a blue moon. By all means, of course, we are all entitled to our opinions, but on that same note, we're also entitled to choose who we surround ourselves with, and if I were Ginger, I'd be kind of thinking about that at this moment. Ginger shouldn't have to explain to Macy that it wasn't about getting attention from a 10th grade boy, and that it was really just about being cool enough to crash a high school party. She shouldn't have to tell her that her goal wasn't to make everyone think that her and Jake had anything to do with one another. They already had this talk in the bathroom. Ginger already explained that she didn't do anything with that kid, and that it wasn't her intention to make it seem like she did. Yet, here Macy is still implying that Ginger wanted everyone to think these awful things about her. It's just really icky and kind of shamey if you ask me. But on that note, this is much more likely a case of Macy not being all too self-aware of how she's coming across at this moment, considering that she's known for having big feelings as it pertains to her friends and all of them growing up. It's understandably a sensitive topic for her. On top of that though, we know good and well that Macy is a true friend to Ginger and that she loves her. While I feel like it was worth noting for the sake of maybe raising some awareness to pay attention to how you come across to your friends in hopes of not offending them, and accidentally burning bridges by sticking your foot in your mouth, I really do need to stress that, in my opinion, I don't think that Macy said this intending to be as hurtful as she came across. One thing I found really interesting reflecting on this one is the moral of the story being told. Of course, always stay true to yourself. Know who you are and don't doubt your morals if you know good and well that your compass is pointed in the right direction. Don't ever do something that puts your reputation at risk to please people who will never like you. Furthermore, if someone is making you feel like you need to change who you are in a negative way to gain their respect or admiration, It's worth evaluating if that person is someone worth even associating with in the first place. The problem with public school, though, is even if you don't want to associate with that person, you're going to have to cross paths with them at some point. This is something that I'm sure all of us that weren't homeschooled can relate to. When it comes to people like Mipsy and Miranda, when you cross paths, they will likely go out of their way to make a comment to you just because they feel this inherent need to bully people that they deem as lower than them socially. Mipsy is just the definition of a pot stirrer, and it says a lot that when Miranda got this hot tea, she wanted to take it straight to Mipsy because she knows good and well that Mipsy will run wild with it, just as much as Miranda herself will. Meanwhile, Courtney, on the other hand, actually has a chance of standing up for Ginger. It's a shame though, circling back to what I said earlier about how the sooner Ginger realizes that she's never gonna win over Miranda and Mipsy, the better. Even if Ginger did come to the conclusion that she doesn't care about molding her reputation around them anymore, or even wanted nothing to do with them at all, they would still go out of their way to target her, and they'd be able to pretty successfully, unless Ginger transferred schools and possibly moved away, considering that they know where she lives. Kids are ruthless sometimes, especially those hell-bent on bullying specific people. I will admit though, I got some satisfaction out of Miranda's face at the very end when Courtney comes up to tell Ginger that Jake has a boyfriend. You can tell by how smug Miranda looks when she approaches that she was expecting this to be a whole dig at Ginger and hurting her feelings type of situation, but when Courtney surprisingly apologizes and takes some accountability, Miranda is thrown through a loop and kind of embarrassed that Courtney is admitting exactly where their jealous feelings came from. You can read it all over her face here, and it's definitely a shocker for her. She isn't used to being a genuine human and showing true apologetic feelings towards someone she's done wrong intentionally. So to have Courtney kind of do it on her behalf was completely baffling for her, I'm sure. This right here says so much about Courtney as a person though, and it speaks volumes to her growth as a character. It's amazing to see this much progression considering this isn't even a Courtney video. As it pertains to Ginger and her side of things here, this episode capitalized on a ton of great tones from the first season as we already touched on, but they also did a great job of building upon these same tones as well, and that's something that I truly appreciate. It's amazing as a viewer to see progression in these characters over time, even though they're being more or less put through the same or similar situations as seen previously. It is amazing to see Ginger adopting that Carl-esque mindset of rubber glue back to you, as she learns to find security in knowing who she is and what she did, regardless of who everyone else says she is or what everyone else thinks she did. Speaking of Carl though, we can't cover this episode and not dive into everything going on in his world here. First of all, I remember this specific episode being probably my all-time favorite as a kid, specifically for the Carl's food cart story arc. The delicious meals with contradictory names was something that always brought me so much joy as a child. As a kid who only watched this show for Carl, it was easy for me to cling to loving this episode simply for that reason. But looking back on it, I have such a different view about this episode. It almost feels like being a completely different person watching this now. I see this arc way differently than I ever have before, and my feelings towards it have definitely changed. This story still mesmerizes me, especially on the heels of the episode that we talked about before this one. In this episode, it seems as if Carl learned absolutely nothing from his and Hoodsy's experience in Never Can Say Goodbye. At the end of that one, I felt some feelings, dude. Seeing the two of them reflect on the relationship between Brandon and Mr. Licorice and how it compares to their own, that shot of them walking down the sidewalk into the sunset, it really sets us up to feel like we're seeing a new Hoodsy and Carl arc. Emphasis on Hoodsy's name being first, considering he's always been the one put second in their friendship. However, in this one, right out the gate, we see Carl choosing Hoodsy's elective for him, even though he really doesn't want to be in cooking class. Carl completely disregards Hoodsy's feelings, forcing him to chase Carl's dreams instead, using him as a pawn in the process, more or less. I mean, as great as their business was flourishing, it's admittedly unfair that Hoodsy didn't even want any of this, yet was forced to be a part of this scheme. Then, of course, come time for the ending, we hear Ginger talking about how Carl is upset about his reputation being trashed, yet there's no mention of Hoodsy or his reputation, considering he was dragged into this and was doing all of the heavy lifting behind the grill. It's just honestly a letdown to see things progress the same as they always have been for Carl and Hoodsy. I genuinely think they missed a fantastic opportunity to show us young boys who were enamored with these characters what it means to be a good friend and how to truly care about someone who is important to you. On another note relating to this story arc though, I found it so ridiculous that their teacher, Miss Gordon, who in the beginning said that electives for 5th graders was a pointless idea, was so against their food cart being a thing until she tasted their food. Like, this lady is standing there quoting and referencing her contract with Chef Bob, trying to shut Carl's idea down, yet when she tastes and enjoys the food, all of a sudden she remembers this loophole clause in the contract. It just screams fishy corruption, and this episode in general made me lose a little bit of faith in Miss Gordon as a leader. Moving on from there, we have to talk about the wisdom in Carl shining through in his advice of telling Ginger to have a rubber glue back to you mindset. It is very admirable for such a young person to have stumbled upon that who cares what other people think mindset, especially when those other people are incorrect. But we certainly need to recognize that there's definitely a line there, and I feel just a little mixed about the message that it's sending. I mean, in real life, kids tend to say things a lot meaner, nastier, and more direct than the things said or implied towards Ginger here in this episode. In real life, allowing people to go around saying extremely obscene things about you without even trying to correct the record can have the potential to literally ruin someone's life in this day and age. I mean, I guess this advice could have been a lot more relevant when this aired in the early 2000s, but nowadays, people gossiping can literally destroy someone's livelihood. I get what they're saying, but again, I think this is relevant to petty nonsense, not accusations specifically, especially in this world we live in. Addressing stuff and putting false rumors to bed is pretty important. Looking back on this episode from start to finish though, it's one that I truly appreciate, and it's an excellent one for us to keep in mind for the rest of this series of videos, as a ton of the lessons learned here would be valuable and applicable when it comes to seeing the rest of this story unfold. Next up, we're going to check out an episode that would really test Ginger in a lot of ways, and it would call into question so many aspects of her life, from her perceptions of herself and prioritizing her own wants, her love life, and even her closest friendships. It's an episode that really does a great job of laying the foundation for a ton of topics that we're going to look at in the future. We're checking out none other than Love with a Proper Transfer Student. This episode starts out at lunchtime at Lucky Junior High, where we see Ginger and her friends, as well as all of the other students, bored out of their minds, saying that nothing exciting has happened in weeks.
Is it possible to have a mirage in a cafeteria?
He must be the new transfer student, Joaquin Cortez.
It may be too soon to tell, but I'm pretty sure I'm in love.
I guess that means you got dibs.
Don't even think about it. Joaquin is all mine.
Later on in the halls, Ginger, Dodie, and Macy are walking when they spy Joaquin looking at a flyer on the corkboard in the hallway. They learn that it's for a musical that the theater department is putting on, and Macy, who's very familiar with this specific musical, explains that it's about a misfit girl who's thrust into the world of Latin dancing while on a vacation with her parents. Ginger says that this is Dodie's perfect chance to get close to Joaquin, so she suggests that Dodie sign up for the auditions. However, when Dodie is too hypnotized by her attraction to this kid to even hold her pencil, Ginger ends up signing up for her.
You auditioning too? Dodie?
Who, me? No, I'm not Dodie. I'm, something that starts with a G.
See you there. Ginger.
I didn't know you were planning to audition, Ginger.
Oh, well, it'll look good on my transcript.
Just then, Mipsy walks up, takes the pencil from Ginger's hand without even asking, and signs herself up, giving the pencil back with nothing but telling them that she's been technically trained. From there, we cut to later on that evening where we see Carl and Hoodsy preparing 3 cups of hot chocolate with marshmallows. It's explained to us that they have a tiny microphone hidden in one of the marshmallows, and they're planning to give the cocoa to Ginger and her friends so that they can eavesdrop on them in hopes of getting any info they deem as blackmail worthy.
Hey, this is a restricted slumber party. No invite, no entrance.
I have no interest in your silly little reindeer games. I'm on the catering committee. Hot chocolate, anyone?
Perfect timing.
How can we be sure you didn't spike these with laxatives?
Carl admits to his less than stellar past of playing pranks on them. However, he says that people change, and that if he was gonna play a prank, he wouldn't just hand deliver it to them like that. Ginger agrees that Carl definitely wouldn't advertise a prank so blatantly, and just like that, their guard is let down as we cut on over to Carl and Hoodsy in the doghouse, listening to Dodie go on and on about every last movement that she saw Joaquin make today. As their conversation continues, Dodie confesses that she thinks Joaquin is way out of her league.
How can you say that? He just moved here. As far as he knows, you might be the coolest, most interesting babe at Lucky Jr.
Ginger's right. Joaquin has no way of knowing you walked around with toilet paper on your shoe the first day of junior high, or that you spill your purse on the cafeteria floor on a regular basis.
Despite that glorious attempt to make Dodie feel better, she somehow feels even worse about her chances with Joaquin. Ginger is able to reassure her, however, saying that she has the mystery woman thing going for her because Joaquin doesn't know anything about her. She says that, in her opinion, Dodie has just as much of a chance as anyone to get his attention.
And once you get the part, you're a shoo-in, because everyone knows actors always fall for their leading ladies.
We better rehearse.
While that's happening, we cut back to Carl and Hoodsy, who are absolutely fed up with Dodie and are ready to hurl if they hear Joaquin's name one more time. Right at that moment, though, Ginger brings up the fact that there's a super romantic kissing scene in this play. This catches Carl's attention, but in perfect timing, someone eats their transmitter, cutting off the conversation mid-sentence. Regardless of that, though, he's still left with an idea from overhearing their conversation.
Oh no, Carl! Someone's eating our transmitter! There goes 6 weeks of collecting cans down the esophagus. Your idea better be good, Carl.
It is. And it'll earn us enough money to buy transmitters for every room in the house. I, Carl Foley, will create a love potion that will make millions!
The next morning, we see Carl sitting at the table while his mom is questioning the odd grocery list of chocolate, chili peppers, oysters, and asparagus that he asked her to get at the store. He brushes off her questioning, saying that he's getting into cooking and that he has a great idea for an amazing mole sauce. Just then, though, Ginger walks in.
Wow, your faux diamond hair clips. I thought you only wear those on special occasions.
Oh, well, all my other barrettes are dirty.
Is that perfume I smell?
I'm auditioning for a play today, and they're posting the results after school, so I'll probably be home late. Okay, Mom, thanks, bye.
Carl leaves for school shortly after his sister, and just like that, we cut on over to the school where auditions for the play are already underway. Currently on stage, we see Joaquin with Mipsy, who is currently reading lines, or should I say shouting lines, as Mipsy clearly has no idea what she's doing and completely lacks not only control of her voice, but also awareness of the emotions that she's supposed to be conveying as an actor.
I don't care what they think, and I'll dance with you in front of the whole world, just to prove it to you!
No, Ellie. I can't let you do that. What will your parents think?
Look at me, Ronnie! Do I look like I care?
You gotta stay away from me, Ellie. Trust me. It's better this way.
Miss Zorsky stands up, applauding Joaquin's performance and subsequently recommending Mipsy check out the role of the lead character's mother. Mipsy storms off in frustration, and Miss Zorsky calls Dodie up to the stage to read lines with Joaquin next.
I don't care what they think, and I'll dance with you in front of the whole world just to prove it to you.
Thank you. Joaquin, stay and read with Ginger.
Look at me, Ronnie. Do I look like I care?
You gotta stay away from me, Ellie. Trust me. It's better this way.
I'm gonna mambo, Ronnie, and there's nothing you can do to stop me.
Later that afternoon, we see the girls walking through the hall and talking as they head to see the final cast listing that's just been posted. Macy talks about how nervous she is, even though she already knows that she landed the role of stage manager. Meanwhile, Dodie, confident that she landed the lead role, compliments Ginger on her audition.
You were pretty good today, Ginger. Maybe you'll get to play the hotel maid who cleans my room.
Maybe.
Joaquin is playing Ronnie!
No surprise there.
Who's playing Ellie? Ginger?
Dodie, you're playing the hotel maid.
After Dodie runs away crying, Joaquin walks right up to Ginger and, with a big smile on his face, he tells her that he'll see her at rehearsals, to which she says that she can't wait. He walks away, turning to wave at Ginger as Macy tells Ginger that for someone who didn't care whether or not she got that part, she sure seems really happy. After that, we fast forward while to the girls' bathroom where Dodie is crying her eyes out in a stall, while Ginger and Macy try to comfort her. She's telling them about how she feels embarrassed, humiliated, and just miserable. Ginger tells them that she thinks she's going to step down, but Dodie tells her that's just going to make everything 10 times worse because Mipsy is her understudy, and that'll just result in her getting closer to Joaquin.
Ginger, you didn't secretly want the role of Ellie, did you?
No, I was all ready to be employee number 3.
Sorry. I can't believe I even thought that. I mean, you're the one who pushed me to audition in the first place. It's just that the part of the hotel maid is so unglamorous. What if Joaquin doesn't see me as anything more than the bearer of fresh towels?
Whoever said the maid couldn't be a babe?
We fast forward to later on, where we see Ginger laying on the couch in front of Static on the TV. Her mom walks in with grocery bag in arm, noticing that Ginger seems down. She takes a seat asking Ginger what's on her mind, and she vaguely explains that she got something that Dodie really wanted, thinking at first that she herself didn't really want it that much. But then eventually she realized that she actually did want it just as bad as Dodie all along, and now she feels guilty for wanting it in the first place.
What thing is that?
The lead in the school play.
Oh, well, I'm sure it stung a little, but Dodie'll get over it.
You think so?
Sure. I promise you this. If Dodie is as loyal a friend as you think she is, she won't hold it against you.
Just then, Ginger's mom hears Carl making a mess in the kitchen as she gets up to see what's going on. Meanwhile, Ginger clings on to one specific word that was said in her mom's sentence. Loyal. Over in the kitchen, Lois busts Carl and Hoodsy grabbing her nice blender as she questions their motives. Carl, again, stresses the puree needed for his mole sauce, and just like that, we cut to Carl's doghouse, where we get further explanation of his plan.
I printed out every aphrodisiac website I could find until Gordo kicked me off her computer.
Are you sure we need all this junk?
Affirmative, Hoods. If we combine every aphrodisiac in existence, we'll create the most potent love potion ever made.
The two continue their quest to make this love potion, substituting crucial ingredients with odd substitutions, such as switching out lavender for his mom's lavender-scented bath salts, or switching out the saliva of a Spanish fighting bull for that of a big angry dog. A couple hours later, we see them in the kitchen still working on it as they try to figure out what they're gonna sneak the mixture into.
We could put it in peanut butter.
Not dark enough. She'll be able to tell.
Who?
Ginger, our guinea pig.
I can't believe your sister agreed to try it out.
She didn't, but we needed someone who isn't in love. Besides, what she doesn't know won't hurt her. Root beer. Ginger usually makes a drink run about this time every night. Give or take a few minutes.
Hoodsy points out that she might be in a lemonade mood instead, so Carl decides to pour out every single drink in the fridge so that root beer is her only option. From there, the two fall asleep at the table waiting for Ginger to come get a drink. They're startled when she walks in and asks what they're doing, but ultimately they play it cool and she walks out with the root beer as the two best friends share a high five. We then cut to later that night where Ginger is laying in bed and practicing her lines.
You hear me, Joaquin? I love you, and I don't care what they think. I think it's pretty obvious I like Joaquin, but is it worth jeopardizing my friendship with Dodie? My best friend in the entire world? 'Cause I do care what she thinks, and I owe her my loyalty. From now on, Ginger's the name, and matchmaking is my game.
From there, we fast forward an unknown amount of time to an active stage full of people all practicing their lines and preparing for their different roles in the play, while Ginger, Macy, and Dodie are sitting in the stands talking. Dodie is directing Ginger down to the last detail about how she wants her to approach matchmaking, saying to basically ask Joaquin what his favorite things are, and no matter what he says, respond by saying that's Dodie's favorite as well. Just then, Joaquin walks up and Ginger tries to introduce him to Dodie, but he blatantly ignores her, instead asking Ginger if she wants to go run some lines.
I thought we could rehearse in here, where it's quiet.
Yeah. Okay, quiet's good. So, Joaquin, what's your favorite color, band, class, and food?
Midnight Blue, The Wetheads, English Lit, and potato chip chicken casserole.
Oh, those are all my favorite things, too.
Shut up.
I mean, those are all my friend Dodie's favorite things. Dodie's, not mine. Dodie's, definitely Dodie's.
A little while later, we cut back to the auditorium where Ginger rejoins her friends who are curious how it went. Before she can explain though, Miss Zorsky calls her to the stage to run the gazebo scene with Joaquin.
But that's the scene where Ellie and Ronnie kiss.
Oh no, I forgot all about that one.
Don't worry, no kissing allowed until opening night.
We see Joaquin and Ginger on the stage running the scene and giving it their all, but Ms. Zorsky tells them that she wants them to run it one last time, but this time she wants them to really crank it up and stare into each other's eyes so that she can really feel the heat in a, quote, let's not cost me my job kind of way.
One last dance?
Oh, my.
I believe I said no kissing until opening night. You can stop now.
Tell me the truth, Macy. Was that a stage kiss or a real kiss?
It looked like a real kiss, but maybe they're just really good actors.
Later on, we see school get out and Ginger catches up with Macy outside. Macy explains that Dodie went home early, and at that, she confronts Ginger, asking if maybe she stopped to think if Dodie isn't the only person who likes Joaquin. As her palms sweat like crazy, Ginger drops her book on the ground, nervous. With Macy finally having more or less put Ginger in check, she decides that she has to go talk to Dodie. Over at Dodie's house, we see Ginger knock on the door, and after answering, Dodie tries to immediately slam it in her face, but Ginger stops her, asking her for the chance to apologize.
I'm listening.
Okay, here goes. When I first saw Joaquin, I felt... But then you felt, which made me feel...
Ginger, did you want to kiss him or not?
Oh, well, I just couldn't help it. Oh!
Later that night, we see Ginger at dinner with her family and not eating very much as she's really bothered by the whole situation at school. Her mom asks her what's wrong and Ginger just blurts it all out, saying that she kissed Joaquin and now Dodie is really mad at her. She runs off all up in her feelings. Meanwhile, Carl on the other hand is just absolutely stoked. We cut to him in his doghouse talking to Hoodsy on his walkie-talkie about how the love potion was a success and how they're gonna be filthy rich. However, he does tell Hoodsy that they need to do some damage control regarding his sister Dodie so that they don't face any negative karmic repercussions. Meanwhile, back in Ginger's room, she's got the door locked while her mom is outside trying to have a talk with her about everything going on.
I know you feel bad about kissing Dodie's crush. The kissing part to be discussed at a later date. But you're almost a teenager now, Ginger, and your hormones have to take some of the responsibility. I advise you to think about what's most important to you. And I know this has after-school special written all over it, but I think you should follow your heart. Well, that was my 2 cents. Take it or leave it. Oh, my back.
From there, we fast forward to the day that the play is premiering. All of the kids are preparing for their big opening night, and things are clearly very tense between Ginger and Dodie, who are sitting far from one another. Miss Zorsky tells Ginger and Joaquin to go run lines together in private, and the two of them walk off. Meanwhile, Carl and Hoodsy approach, playing as if they're trying to sell root beer for $3 a bottle.
That's pretty steep.
Well, since you're my sister's friend, and my friend's sister, I'm gonna sell it to you for the low cost of nothing.
Thanks, but no thanks. My stomach can't handle anything carbonated right now.
Carl and Hoodsy decide that they're gonna try to target Joaquin instead in hopes of tricking him into drinking the root beer. They ask Dodie if she knows where he is, and she tells them to follow her as she leads them to the room where he and Ginger are running their lines. Just like that, we cut right over to that exact room where Joaquin and Ginger are in the middle of running lines, and he's getting really close to her, backing her against the door as they lead up to the scene where they're supposed to kiss.
Sorry, Joaquin, I can't kiss you unless it's going to be an awkward stage kiss in front of dozens of people.
But I kinda got the vibe that you liked me as much as I liked you. Am I way off base here?
No. Unfortunately, you're not, but, well, just you and me together, it's just not an option.
Why not?
Because relationships may come and go, but best friends are forever.
Carl and Hoodsy are bummed that their love potion has seemingly worn off. Meanwhile, Dodie is through the roof happy about what just happened. We fast forward to after school, where Dodie is sitting outside waiting for Ginger.
I heard what you said to Joaquin. That was the single coolest thing anyone's ever done for me. Ginger, I know you really like him too. And I know it wasn't easy to do what you did, but you're choosing me over Joaquin? Best friends don't get more loyal than that.
You said the L word.
Later that evening, we see Ginger sitting at the table, enjoying a snack and about to take a sip of a bottle of Carl's root beer, when all of a sudden, Carl walks up and he stops her. She's confused until he pulls off the label, exposing the true label underneath for Carl's extreme love potion.
It may not last long, but it's powerful. Confession time, sis. I sort of used you as a guinea pig to test the first batch, which makes me kind of responsible for the whole Joaquin kissing you, Dodie hating you fiasco.
Ginger stands up, thanking Carl for taking responsibility, noting that that is a big step up from his usual behavior, but she says that he's completely wrong because that root beer that she grabbed the other day was for their mom, who's been keeping the close company of nothing but a heating pad with a hurt back for the last few nights.
You mean it didn't work at all?
Sorry.
Well, it might have if we'd used... Hey, Mom! Can I use your credit card?
What for?
I need to see a man about some saliva.
Now this episode is truly a crazy one to dive into because it's chock full of so many different aspects that really do need to be considered from every angle. Like, everyone's point of view in this situation deserves to be acknowledged, and I feel like a few really important points of view were completely overlooked here. Now, as I approach the beginning here, one of the first things that stuck with me is how this episode greatly continues our understanding of how terrible of a person Mipsy is. We really see full force just how much of an inconsiderate jerk that she is to everyone around her. I find it kind of funny too because her role here was an incredibly minimal side role, except for the beginning here. We're kind of made to believe that she's going to play an important role here at the start, but she's just kind of an antagonistic pawn in the plot, more or less. I also find it interesting how, in the early beginnings of this show, it felt like Courtney and Miranda were intended to play that antagonistic role, period, point blank. Like, from the start, we're made to perceive them really as the only true antagonistic characters here on Ginger's side of things. Then, as time went on, things started to shift in an interesting direction. Courtney is starting to become more of a caring person and a friend to Ginger. Miranda is becoming more spiteful than ever before. And then Mipsy, who didn't really appear much early on other than being a filler background character, really stepped into the light to become a full-blown villain who never does anything other than spreading negativity. It was an interesting progression between the three characters here. I mean, we've seen the soft and sensitive side of both Miranda and Courtney, but as far as Mipsy is concerned, she's pretty much the only character who, at this point, has been cemented as an antagonist and straight up nothing more. There isn't any perceivable value to her character other than just being rude and self-absorbed. In this one, it's really shown just how Mipsy always puts herself and her wants before everybody else. At the start, when Dodie lays eyes on Joaquin, Mipsy straight up tells her to not even think about interacting with the new kid because he is hers. Then, right after that, when another girl is mid-sitting down next to him, Mipsy blatantly pushes her away with a rude look, acting coy about it like this boy isn't going to notice her doing that. I mean, first of all, if I was this kid and anybody approached me with that energy, I'd immediately be uncomfortable and be seeing them as a red flag that I need to watch closely because they clearly have ulterior motives. Second of all, though, not only is she disregarding Dodie's feelings and this other girl's feelings, instead prioritizing her own, but she's also disregarding Joaquin's feelings as well. What if he doesn't like you, Mipsy? What if he did like Dodie? Or this other girl? Or even Ginger? What are you gonna do? Target anyone who ends up getting this guy's attention out of spite? I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if she did. Honestly, what surprises me more is the fact that she didn't do it. In hindsight, it's kind of out of character that Mipsy just let Ginger have the leading role without bullying her or doing anything awful to get her retaliation. Ginger getting picked and just being able to win like that isn't really how these shows usually work. With that being said though, Mipsy being a bully has already been established. And following that plot point further would just be kind of beating a dead horse in a storytelling aspect. This episode was meant to revolve around Ginger and Dodie's friendship, unpacking that a little bit further, so it makes sense that they put Mipsy on the back burner. From there though, we definitely have to touch on a few things as it pertains to Macy's role in all of this. First of all, that part in the beginning where Ginger is having a sleepover and Macy was talking to Dodie about how Joaquin has no way of knowing about all of the embarrassing things that she listed. Now, this right here circles back to a point that I made earlier, and it further cements how Macy likely doesn't pay very close attention to how she comes across. When she was telling Dodie about how she walked around all day with toilet paper on her shoe, or how she routinely spills her purse on the cafeteria floor, she didn't stop to think about how what she's saying could be hurting Dodie's confidence in this moment where they're trying to build her up. Sure, they may all be true, valid examples of things that Dodie has done, but as it pertains to their goal in talking to Dodie to build her confidence, it's very counterproductive. Expanding a little more on Macy though, there was yet again another moment or two in this episode where I found myself wondering if she's more socially aware than she leads on. Specifically in that moment when it's revealed that Ginger is playing the lead role and Dodie runs away crying. Then, immediately after that, Ginger has a rather flirty interaction with Joaquin. As all of that is happening around her, Macy is just standing there and taking it all in. After it's said and done and Joaquin walks away, she takes the time to say that Ginger seems awfully happy for someone who didn't care about any of this. I mean, I can't help but wonder if, again, this was her making a random observation, or if she's trying to subtly imply to Ginger that what she's doing is pretty plain as day and that she needs to cool it because she's hurting Dodie's feelings by pretending to not have feelings about any of this. It makes me wonder if she's more or less calling Ginger out on lying at even just a hint of it being a possibility. Fast forwarding towards the end, we would see Macy taking the time to ask Ginger if she's stopped and thought about if maybe Dodie wasn't the only one who likes Joaquin. This right here confirms that Macy definitely knew what was going on. I mean, she's not stupid. But I can't help but wonder how long before this confirmation was it that Macy realized what had been happening. And honestly, it very well could have been from this very first interaction between Ginger and Joaquin. I definitely have to talk about how everyone's approach to reading lines with Joaquin during the audition was very effective in portraying how ineffective their romantic advances towards him were. It's an excellent metaphor, and I love the way that the writers of the show approached this. We see Mipsy basically coming out of the gate with the gusto and overconfidence of the most average middle-aged man as she stands on the stage completely failing to deliver these lines, but thinking that she's just crushing it. It's comparable to how she approaches Joaquin, pushing everyone else out of the way and claiming him like he's her property when he really doesn't seem interested whatsoever. Her approach is a surefire way to turn away most people that she approaches in that manner. Way too overconfident while just portraying herself very poorly and rudely. Meanwhile, Dodie is super obsessed with this guy just based on his looks and mannerisms. She's enamored with his every move and every last detail of his looks. For days now, Joaquin is literally all she can talk about. When it comes to her approach to reading lines at the audition with him, she came on very strong and was full-blown intruding on his personal space in a forceful way due to her overexcitement. This is definitely comparable to her extreme obsession upon first sight of this boy. Just like the way that she didn't get the part, coming on way too strong in your feelings for someone can be a surefire way to turn that person away. When she got her chance to get close to him, she got uncomfortably close, and as a result, he was very uninterested. Then we get to Ginger, who clearly has some feelings for Joaquin, yet isn't super assertive with them, isn't overly direct and coming on too strong, and almost seems from the start like she isn't too sure how she feels about him. Meanwhile, everybody else was stricken at first sight. It's like she saw him and thought maybe, but was more reserved about her feelings because Dodie was swooning so hard. Then, when Ginger reads lines with him at the audition, she just kinda lets it flow naturally, doesn't overthink it, and plays it cool. As a result, you can tell he clearly smiled at her with intent, as if Ginger had piqued his interest. He is smitten with her from the start, clearly liking someone who can forge a natural attachment and not throw themselves like crazy at him just upon introduction. Continuing on with Dodie, there were too many examples in this episode of her being a selfish friend. Like, it's honestly baffling how much of an awful friend she is at times, combined with her absolute lack of self-awareness. The first thing that really set me off was after the auditions, right before they saw the results. Dodie displays extreme overconfidence that she got the lead role, saying maybe Ginger can play the maid that cleans up her room. But when she finds out that the roles are actually reversed, she's super offended at Ginger. All of a sudden, being the maid that cleans up after the lead role isn't such a luxurious position when she's the one who has to do it. It's ultimately really frustrating because it's not like Ginger gets to choose who plays what part in the play. Furthermore, let's be honest, if Ginger didn't try out, Dodie still wouldn't have gotten it. She was just awful. I mean, on that note, it is surprising that Mipsy landed understudy because she was even worse than Dodie was in my opinion. I mean, you'd think there would be at least one other person there who did better than Mipsy and Dodie. It's not really that high of a bar to raise. Now, please don't get me wrong though, Dodie's feelings are very valid. It's okay for her to be hurt and upset that she didn't get the part. She wanted it to get closer to Joaquin, and to not get that is hurtful. Furthermore, losing to your best friend can also be hurtful if you're someone who struggles to root for anyone other than yourself, but it's ultimately such a spirit breaker to see how she seemed to aim that frustration at Ginger like she was the one in control of any of this. I mean, Dodie full-blown guilted the hell out of Ginger for getting that role when she was clearly the best actress out of anyone who tried out. I could see her guilting her for trying to swoop in and flirt with the guy that she was trying to flirt with, but the thing is, at this point, Dodie didn't even know that. It was purely about who got the lead role at this moment. We see Ginger get to the point of being guilted so much that she's even offering to give up the part just because of Dodie's feelings. Sacrificing something she earned just to make someone that's sad that they didn't get it happy. It really does show what kind of relationship that Ginger and Dodie have. I mean, come on. We even see Dodie go as far as asking Ginger if she secretly wanted to play the lead role. Again, like we said with Mipsy earlier, I find myself asking, why does that matter, Dodie? What if she did want that? Do you have a problem with that? Furthermore, what if she does like Joaquin? Do you have a problem with that too? Honestly, I just have a huge issue with how many people in this show put their own feelings first before literally everybody else. Like, Mipsy and Dodie are essentially one and the same, thinking that they have claim to Joaquin. Ginger even asks in the beginning if that means that he's off limits. With that being said, it's one of those where, in my opinion, Ginger should have probably admitted to Dodie that she thinks she likes Joaquin as well, and from there it's up to them to hammer out the details of how they would approach that situation. We're going to dive more into that aspect of things, of course, but focusing on right now, this is just so problematic to me because where in this are any of these girls taking Joaquin's feelings into consideration? They're so caught up on which one of them gets to claim him as their property that they don't stop and think that maybe he doesn't even like any of them. I mean, I totally respect friend code and drawing a line in the sand as far as that kind of thing goes, but ultimately it's worth considering if the person that both people are interested in has a preference for either one of them to begin with. On a Ginger specific note though, it's really frustrating to see her immediately having to place all of her feelings aside about not only this boy, but also the play. Like, she had to sit here and pretend that she was totally psyched about playing employee number 3 and bummed that she was chosen for the lead role. She's not even allowed to show any excitement about getting a lead role here because Dodie is so hurt about everything. I'm not trying to say that Dodie doesn't deserve to have room for her own feelings, but what I am saying is that she hasn't even for a second made any room for literally anyone else's feelings except for her own. Circling back though, possibly one of the biggest things to note here is that Ginger should have been honest from the start with Dodie. When she started thinking she may have been interested in Joaquin, she would have benefited greatly from telling Dodie. I'm sure that Dodie wouldn't have taken it well, but even then, Ginger shouldn't have lied about this whole thing. I mean, you'd have to be a fool to not see how worse things got when they were in the bathroom and Dodie directly asks Ginger if she actually wanted things to go this way, and Ginger blatantly lies to her. Even though, in my opinion, Dodie put Ginger in a pretty crummy situation by completely disregarding her feelings and prioritizing her own, Ginger is still very much in the wrong for lying. While I wholeheartedly feel that Dodie has very selfish actions as a friend, she does deserve recognition for being an honest friend in this episode. She was definitely wearing her heart on her sleeve and wasn't afraid to tell her friends that she liked Joaquin and that she would like them to keep away from him. Whether that was a fair thing or not is subjective depending on the friendship dynamic, but at least she laid her cards out on the table, whether we as viewers agree with that mindset or not. Another thing I definitely wanted to touch on was that part when Ginger's mom sits down with her saying that if Dodie is as loyal of a friend as she thinks that she is, then she won't hold Ginger getting the lead part against her. This right here is a huge statement in my opinion, and it's our cue as viewers to pay close attention to how Dodie is taking Ginger getting the lead part. This is not only wise motherly advice, but it's also the show's writers telling us, period point blank, that if Dodie holds it against Ginger, she's a bad friend. It's important for us to keep in mind the context of what Ginger is talking about here, and what the lead role really represents. None of these girls really cared about the play from the start. Ginger signed them up in an effort to get Dodie closer to Joaquin. This was never about the lead role for any of them. It was about Joaquin's affection. On that note, we can straight up white out the words lead part in Ginger's mother's advice and replace them with Joaquin's heart, and it still applies. If Dodie was as loyal of a friend as Ginger thinks she is, she wouldn't hold Joaquin liking her against her. It's not like Ginger is in control of whether or not Joaquin likes Dodie. However, what Ginger is in control of is how she approaches the situation and how she chooses to proceed. Ginger knows that Dodie likes this boy, and she knows that Dodie as a person could not handle her best friend being in a relationship with someone that she likes that doesn't like her back. So what does Ginger do? Decides to not engage with this guy any further in an effort to not hurt Dodie's feelings. She sets her own feelings aside because she doesn't want to hurt Dodie, who she's known a lot longer than Joaquin. What really irks me though is knowing that if things had gone the way that Dodie hoped that they would, and she had gotten the lead role and Joaquin had fallen in love with her, if Ginger did come to her at any point admitting that she actually does have feelings for Joaquin and saying that it was hurting her feelings seeing the two of them together, I really don't think that Dodie would care at all. Her being the selfish friend that she is would likely tell Ginger to suck it up and call her jealous because there's finally someone who's interested in Dodie instead of her. I truly feel like this show, as amazing as it is, doesn't do the best job of walking the line between being a good friend and advocating for yourself. There are so many times that Ginger is the bigger person and just lets someone walk all over her or denies herself some happiness because her happiness would make someone else sad due to their jealousy. Ultimately, what it comes down to though is one of the biggest themes of the story: loyalty. When Ginger's mom gives her that advice I referenced, she doesn't say as good of a friend as Ginger thinks she is. She says as loyal of a friend. That word specifically is what sticks with Ginger as someone who's able to consider other people's feelings instead of just her own and analyze her own actions and how they could affect someone. This moment right here makes Ginger realize that she hasn't been a loyal friend to Dodie, so it isn't fair for her to expect Dodie to be loyal to her. She realizes that in her lying to Dodie about all of this, she herself is in the wrong. Again, these are just all continuing themes that encompass the same message. Even though Dodie didn't consider Ginger's feelings and wasn't a very good friend in that regard, at least she didn't lie to Ginger. If there's anything that's got me mixed about this message, it's that it comes with the implication that even if someone who is supposed to be your friend is disregarding your feelings and prioritizing themselves always, they still deserve your respect and honesty. But in all reality, it's not about what that person deserves. It's about who you are as a person and how you operate. As a person, Ginger is typically one to honor her friendships and prioritize them, so it makes sense that in the end, she would leave Joaquin in the dust, prioritizing Dodie's feelings over both her own and his. Now, I do want to stop and take a second though to talk about what options she did have at the point that her mother gave her that advice. Ultimately, I felt like Ginger had 3 options here. Either she can come clean to Dodie, tell her that she really is happy to have gotten that part and that she does like Joaquin, choosing to pursue him further regardless of Dodie's feelings, but at least she was honest about it. Or she can stop now, step back, and draw a boundary declaring Joaquin off limits. It's already bad enough that she's lied as much as she had, so with that being said, she could stick to those lies she's already told, allowing them to be her truth and silencing her true feelings in the name of forcing her lies into becoming truths. Or of course, the third and probably best option was telling Dodie the truth, apologizing for hurting her and lying, and making the choice to not pursue Joaquin out of not wanting to hurt Dodie's feelings. In that case, Dodie gets the truth and Ginger decides that she isn't pursuing something that's going to hurt someone she cares about. What's funny though is we ended up kind of seeing a mix of the 3 unfold over the course of this episode. When it's announced that Ginger and Joaquin would be playing the lead roles and Dodie ends up being clearly hurt by it, Ginger ends up taking option 2 initially. She steps back, declares Joaquin off limits, and doubles down on her lies, trying to put herself in the position of matchmaker to convince herself and everyone else that she doesn't like Joaquin and wants to set him up with Dodie. From there though, when playing matchmaker is an absolute disaster, Ginger comes to a point where she can't contain her feelings for him anymore, as she and Joaquin end up on stage sharing a kiss right in front of Dodie. This right here was Ginger coming clean about her feelings, showing that she was happy to get this part and that she does like Joaquin. The truth came out and it definitely ended up hurting Dodie and proved to just make everything a lot worse, as you'd expect. Then finally, as we saw in the conclusion, after the feelings were all out there, she apologizes and decides not to pursue Joaquin any further, not wanting to hurt Dodie and putting their friendship first. I just find it interesting because it's one of those where it kind of felt like Ginger was flying by the seat of her pants and wasn't really sure which direction she was going until things ended up sideways in a ditch. Another thing we definitely need to talk about was how pointless the approach to matchmaking was in this episode. I mean, I get that aligned interests is important to relating to anyone for the most part, but like faking it and lying about those interests is bound to go terribly wrong at some point. It just felt so icky for Dodie to full-blown tell Ginger to lie to Joaquin about the things that Dodie likes in an effort to essentially trick him into liking her. Furthermore, aligned interests doesn't mean that someone is going to be romantically interested in you. For most people, that spark is either there or it isn't. Just because you trick someone into thinking that you both like the same exact things doesn't mean that they're automatically gonna want to date you, especially if they aren't interested in you romantically in the first place. I also was a bit confused at that point when Joaquin lists all of his favorite things that Ginger asked, and she automatically responds saying those are her favorite things too. There's a few different things that it could mean, and I'd love to hear how you guys perceived this down in the comments. For me, I'm thinking either Ginger actually did like those things and was kind of caught off guard by him actually genuinely liking the same things as her, or less likely that she was kind of subconsciously doing for herself what she said she was going to do for Dodie. Honestly, in my opinion, I think that there is a chance that all those things Joaquin listed could potentially be things that Ginger likes as well, which could be why she responded so quickly and excitedly. personally, the way I perceived the initial development of this whole dynamic between Ginger and Joaquin was very organic. It felt like they likely could have had some genuine compatibility, unlike Dodie, who essentially was ready to change her whole personality to fit Joaquin's. However, I could be wrong in that thinking, considering we've never been told what Ginger's favorite band, food, and whatnot are. Now, the next thing that I want to touch on might be kind of a touchy subject, fair warning. But I genuinely have a bone to pick with Miss Zorsky saying this.
Really look into each other's eyes. I want to feel the heat. In a let's not cost me my job kind of way.
Listen, okay? I'm no actor. I wasn't in the drama club and I don't know the first thing about method acting. But is it just me or was this pretty inappropriate? Her saying that she wants them to really stare into each other's eyes and that she wants to feel the heat, it just feels like her really pushing these kids into a very awkward situation. But then again, I almost feel like I'm in the wrong thinking about it that way because, again, I don't know the first thing about theater. Maybe it's normal for a fully grown woman to tell two hormonal preteens to make her feel the heat in a let's not cost me my job kind of way. I will say though, if an adult said something like this to one of my kids and then what unfolded here had happened, well, I'd be one pretty pissed off dad and someone would be ripped a new one and probably losing their job. Honestly, I think someone here probably should have gone to administration and said something. This teacher straight up pressured them into pushing the envelope, and then they ended up pushing it at her request. In my opinion, it doesn't matter that she said, in a let's not cost me my job kind of way. And as a matter of fact, the fact that she felt the need to say that in the first place should tell everyone that she's encouraging something that she definitely shouldn't be. I mean, Miss Zorsky is sitting here playing with fire, then when the entire forest goes ablaze, she doesn't really do anything. She just continues on like anything about the situation is okay. It made me lose a ton of respect for Miss Zorsky. On top of that though, how irresponsible was it for her to send Ginger and Joaquin off to run lines in private when she already saw firsthand that they are prone to getting physical with one another? I mean, they were full-blown making out after the teacher told them not to, and they continued for a bit after she said to stop. Then from there, she thought it would be a safe idea to send these children off into a secluded room together to practice these same romantic lines over and over again. Like, we all saw where this went, too. It came to a point where Ginger and Joaquin were in this room alone together at Miss Zorsky's request, and she was put in a really uncomfortable position. In all reality, Miss Zorsky enabled the situation where we saw Ginger being very uncomfortable with Joaquin's advances as he walked her against the door and tried to kiss her before she decided to push him away. There was just so much potential for this entire situation to go seriously bad, and as the dominoes fall, it essentially would have been Miss Zorsky's responsibility for enabling whatever could have happened. Closing in on the end of the Ginger portion of things here, we have to talk about the ending of the episode. When things are all wrapped up, we see Dodie being super thankful to have such a loyal friend. Again, it ties into the importance of loyalty and being a good friend. However, the sentiment they portray that romantic relationships come and go, but friendships are forever, is completely untrue. Blanket statements like that can never be true, as there will always be outliers in our world. Some friends are bad for you, period. Some friends enable dangerous and toxic behaviors. And some friends put their wants and preferences above everyone else's. Meanwhile, some romantic relationships can do the same. But also, some relationships can heal you from toxic friendships and show you what it means to experience unconditional love. And you know what? that same exact thing applies vice versa. The bottom line is that people vary wildly, and blanket statements like that can never accurately assess an entire topic such as friendship or romantic relationships, because those things look different for everyone. Some people tolerate more crap from their friends than others. Some people dish more crap to their friends than others. Some people have give and take relationships. Some people have even and reciprocal relationships. It can never be as black and white as always choosing a friendship over a relationship, especially if one of those people is forcing you to pick in the first place. If anyone in the situation is giving you an ultimatum, it might be worth assessing if the person putting you in that situation is worth picking in the first place. Context truly matters though, as again, that's not always the case. If you're in the situation where you have an abusive friend and your romantic partner is making you choose between the two because they can't stomach watching you being treated so badly anymore by someone who's supposed to be your friend, I mean, the choice is obvious there. These kinds of things are subjective, and it's always worth analyzing everything on a case-by-case basis in life. You shouldn't feel guilty about forsaking a friendship that's negatively affecting your life. Now, as we wind down here, I have to touch on Carl's role in this episode, especially considering that it tied directly into what Ginger had going on. First of all, I didn't understand Carl putting his wireless transmitter in a marshmallow. If he's trying to spy on them, why not just hide it somewhere? Like, he could have taped it to the bottom of the tray that he had and left it behind in Ginger's room. Or if he really wanted to be risky, he could have taped it to one of the cups somewhere. I mean, Hoodsy said that they had to collect cans for weeks just to get enough money for that one single transmitter. It really feels careless and dumb that Carl would just let it get eaten like that. He's definitely smart enough to think of a way to do this without losing out on all the money that he had saved up as well. On a completely different note from that though, I certainly have to touch on Carl's love potion and him planning to use Ginger as his guinea pig. Like, this is so messed up on too many levels. But furthermore, I have to point out that he put bath salts in it. Him feeding this to anyone is just so awful. Those bath salts are full of synthetic lab-made stimulants, and consuming them will increase your heart rate and blood pressure, as well as potentially causing full-blown psychosis. In all reality, this kid was pretty much trying to spike his sister's drink, but ended up spiking his mother's drink unknowingly instead. Like, whether or not there was bath salts in it, trying to feed your own sister a drink full of aphrodisiacs is just so weird and gross. Like, what the hell, Carl? I also can't help but wonder if maybe Lois's extreme pain in her lower back could have potentially been kidney pain from her body trying to process the bath salts that she drank. However, I think with her being a nurse, she would probably be able to identify kidney pain and differentiate it from lower back pain pretty easily. If there's any final statement regarding this episode that I'd like to end on, it would be how unethical of an invention that this love potion is. The idea of forcing someone to have those kind of feelings by secretly getting them to drink a bunch of aphrodisiacs is just really despicable, and anyone who would buy such a product should probably be put on a list. Now, before we get on to the final episode that we're going to cover today, I really want to take a second to thank all of you who are still here. I know that this journey is a super long one, and I appreciate you seeing it through with me. I promise not only is it going to be worth it by the end of this video, but by the end of this series, oh man, will we have been through some stuff. Thanks so much for being here, and I'm happy to say that I genuinely saved the best for last. The next episode that we're diving into is one that I really am so glad exists. It's an episode that would actually pick up the pieces that were left behind by last season's finale, Season of Caprice. We're checking out the episode Ginger's Solo. As this episode starts out, we see Ginger, Dodie, and Macy in the locker room as Ginger accidentally puts her sweater on backwards.
Well, it's official. Ginger's suffering from a severe case of post-traumatic summer love disorder.
You're right, guys. I have totally got Sasha on the brain. In fact, I just spent all of American history writing him another letter.
Ginger, Sasha has not returned any of your letters or phone calls.
Maybe it's time for me to wake up and smell the rejection, huh?
Dodie tells Ginger that the only reason that Sasha hasn't reached out to her is because with boys, it's out of sight, out of mind. Ginger ends up taking this in full stride, saying that it makes perfect sense and that all she needs to do is visit him to get his attention again. The only issue here is that there's no way that her mom is going to drive her the 2.5 hours there. As the girls all sit there bummed out, we cut over to the elementary school computer lab where Carl and Hoodsey are bored sitting at the computer doing schoolwork. They end up overhearing Blake Grippling playing a computer game, so they come over to check it out.
Computer games?
How sedentary lifestyle can you get?
As it so happens, this little game is getting me ready for the real thing. You obviously haven't heard the news.
Which is...
The Gripplings are purchasing a 10% stake in a real Egyptian tomb.
You mean like with a mummy and everything?
Of course. It's in the purchase contract.
Carl ends up picking Blake's brain a little bit, wondering how much 1% of his family's 10% would cost, which comes out to a whopping $10,000. Blake doubts Carl and Hoodsey's ability to come up with $10,000, and of course, Carl takes that as a challenge, which he accepts. As Blake walks away with a laugh, Hoodsey asks Carl how they could possibly come up with that kind of money, to which Carl says it's as easy as just getting jobs. After that, we cut back on over to Ginger, Macy, and Dodie, who've just found a flyer at the school saying that their school band has been accepted into the national competition, which just so happens to be hosted by Heathered Hills, where Sasha goes to school.
It's a sign! You think Sasha. Ta-da! Way to get to Sasha's school!
But I'd have to join the band. Which is filled with so many talented and unique people.
Pulled the nose up on that plane at the last minute, didn't you?
Sorry, Macy.
Dodie asks Macy why she didn't tell them about this trip, considering that she's in the band, but Macy says that she was forced to take a leave of absence due to her lung capacity not being able to handle the clarinet anymore. As such, she wasn't even aware of the trip to begin with. Macy suggests that Ginger stow away on the bus. Meanwhile, Dodie says that she could just join the marching band. However, Ginger says that she doesn't even know the first thing about playing or even holding a brass instrument.
Right. And they're pretty particular about that in band.
Hello, you're talking to the president of the Ethnic Cooking Club here. In other words, why let a lack of talent and ability stand in your way?
We cut over to the band room where the teacher is preparing for class. Ginger is begging him to let her join, and he's suspicious that she wants to join so conveniently in time for the national competition. She says that she really wants to go on this trip and that it's important to her, but nevertheless, the teacher says that though he admires her passion, there aren't any openings at the moment. Just in the nick of time though, a random student comes into the band room to tell the teacher that he has to drop band class until he gets his grades up per Principal Milty's orders.
You're gonna have to find someone else to play the extra grande triangle.
Well, what with the pressure of the looming competition, I guess this is your lucky day.
Oh, yes! What's an extra grande triangle?
From there, we cut over to Carl and Hoodsey perusing the classified ads in the newspaper in hopes of finding a job. Hoodsey is all over the 6-figure per year career in the computer science industry. However, Carl points out his lack of qualifications, specifically an MBA. However, the listing that catches Carl's eye is one for a telephone psychic medium.
Absolutely no experience necessary, melodic voice a plus, $10 an hour plus commission.
We're in!
Not exactly. You gotta be 18. But you know what all these ads say to me, Hoods?
We need fake IDs?
It means that there are some serious bucks to be made in foreseeing the future. And if we cut out the middleman, we can make even more.
Hoodsy points out that being a psychic is a gift that people seem to be born with, but Carl says that he has many talents and he doesn't know if this is one until he tries. Just like that, he puts on his psychic cap, and we cut back over to Ginger, who's in her room with her friends, as she tries to plan the perfect outfit to step off of the bus in, hoping to really catch Sasha's eye. However, much to her dismay, Macy points out that there's actually a regulation band uniform that she's required to wear at all times. Dodie tells her that the uniform isn't really the most flattering of attire.
Think this'll help improve the uniform? Not a chance. Oh. Well, if I have to look a little dorky to be with Sasha, it'll be worth it.
Outside, we see Carl and Hoodsy working on their psychic storefront when Carl's mom arrives. She asks what they're up to, and Carl explains that since she's always asking him to be more proactive, he decided to start his own business.
I was thinking more along the lines of a paper route.
Pittance.
So you're planning on taking money from unsuspecting kids in exchange for a line of baloney?
You know, it's negative thinking like that threatens to stunt my emotional and spiritual growth, Lola. Are you sure you want that responsibility?
For the record, I'm not fighting you on this, only because I'm in a good mood.
After that, we fast forward to the next day at school, where Ginger is showing up right on time for band practice. However, when she walks through the door, she finds that everybody is already there and has started without her.
For the record, all the truly dedicated band members are here at least a half hour early.
Sorry I'm on time. Ginger, why are you here? Especially when you don't have to be.
It's a long story.
I'm already bored.
The teacher introduces Ginger to the class before he goes to retrieve the extra grande triangle. Ginger takes her seat and she starts making friends with the tuba player who sits next to her. However, she is floored when she sees how massive the triangle is, and literally floored when she attempts to put it on. Meanwhile, the great Carlini has officially started giving his psychic readings in the form of answering 3 questions for $1. Up first, we see him answering a few questions for Brandon Hixby.
I want to know, where Mr. Licorice hid his parka, if Stuart really put me up for adoption on the internet, and what Mommy and Daddy are getting me for Christmas.
In the lettuce crisper, yes, and even I don't squeal on Santa. Next!
Wow, thanks, Carl. You're a bad little monkey, yes you are. Somebody needs a timeout.
After Brandon, we see Blake enter the room as he starts antagonizing Carl a bit, dragging him for running an operation like this. He passes over $1 and asks if Carl is faking his mystic abilities and if he's aware that he can be sued for damages if he's caught giving out fake predictions.
Negative, not gonna happen, and you have one more question.
Oh, is our attic haunted?
Not just the attic, but also the downstairs powder room and part of the garage. Making Blake miserable has got to be worth banking a little bad karma. Next!
As band practice continues, Ginger seems to be truly struggling to take it seriously. The teacher has to keep reminding her about her posture, as well as making sure to hit the note at the right time, and Ginger just doesn't really seem to care much. Meanwhile, her new friend next to her points out that the extra grande triangle is a very important instrument, and she calls her out for not taking it seriously. She says if Ginger is going to continue to mock her instrument, she needs to seriously rethink going on the trip tomorrow. After school, we see Ginger walk out to the front steps as she asks her if they can talk for a bit.
I'm sorry I've been disrespectful of this whole band thing. I, kinda had an ulterior motive for joining.
A guy?
How did you know?
You've been holding on to that locket for dear life.
He goes to Heathered Hills. But listen, I know how important this competition is, so I'm gonna really work hard. Promise.
I'll save you a seat on the bus tomorrow.
Better leave room for the extra grande triangle, too.
Back at Carl's Profit for Profit, we see him handling his last customer, Terrence, who only has one question: whether or not he aced the history test that they took today. Carl doesn't put much thought to it, and he just says yes, which has Terrence super pumped. However, he warns Carl that if he's lying, his older brother is going to beat Carl up.
And did you just tell him he's gonna get an A on a test?
I calls him how I sees him.
Carl, he's already repeated our grade twice. And Gordo's history test was wicked hard.
And your point is?
You may have just got his hopes up is all.
New money smell.
We cut to the next day where Ginger is boarding the bus to head to the competition as her friends are sending her off. We see her get on, and it hits her like a ton of bricks that she's only 2.5 hours away from seeing Sasha again. She takes her seat next to her friend Katie and is clutching her heart-shaped necklace like crazy.
Careful, Ginger. It's like you got the two of you going steady already.
Can't help it.
Time passes on the bus as Ginger daydreams about her and Sasha being together the whole time. By the time she snaps out of it, the entire 2.5 hours have passed and they're arriving at Heathered Hills already, causing Ginger to go crazy with butterflies.
Are you okay, Ginger?
Yeah, fine. I don't think Sasha's here anyway.
Sasha? Camp Caprice, Sasha? There were copper-colored ponies, Sasha? That's why you joined?
Uh-huh.
Well, I guess a guy is a good enough reason to join the band. At least no one threatened to pull your future car privileges if you didn't.
Ginger begins to walk off to find Sasha, but her teacher cuts her off, saying that they all need to go to the football field for a quick practice before the competition. They all head out single file, crossing in front of runners on the track to get to the field, when we see none other than Sasha approaching.
Sasha?
Oh, hey, Ginger. What are you doing here?
I'm with the band. I'm in the band.
Oh, right. Cool. Oh, hey, I'm sorry I didn't return your letters. It's just that
Oh, don't worry about it. You're probably really busy, or you didn't have stamps, envelopes, paper. It doesn't really matter. We're both here now.
Katie calls Ginger, telling her that the rest of the band is waiting on her to start practice, so Ginger asks Sasha if they can maybe meet up in the lunchroom later. He agrees, but we don't have to read too far into the look on his face to tell plain as day that he feels guilty, because there's clearly something that he's struggling to tell her. After that unfolds, we cut on over to Carl's class, where we see that Ms. Gordon is tearing everybody a new one for doing so awful on the history test that Carl told Terrence he got an A on.
The majority of you got C's, and only one of you received an A.
Of all the A's on all the tests.
Nicely done, Mr. Fatley, and feel free to ignore my patronizing comments.
You guys prefer a triple-strength mega noogie or a nuclear wedgie?
Carl and Hoodsy both predict nothing but pain in their future as Terrence continues to stare them down menacingly. Meanwhile, back in Ginger's world, the band is in the middle of practicing while she's completely checked out. She's standing there staring off and not paying attention, which leads to her missing her note, causing all of her peers, as well as her teacher, to get very upset with her. The teacher begins belittling her, calling her out for her head being somewhere else, and accusing her of wanting to jump on the band train right when they start getting close to what he considers to be the big time.
I handed you the extra grande triangle as though I was handing you a loaf of bread or a box of highlighters. How could you possibly have known that the triangle is the backbone of this orchestra?
Oh, I am so sorry, Mr. Flower. Everybody, it won't happen again.
Immediately after that, We cut to Ginger running into a hallway in search of Sasha. She finds him waiting for her nearby, and the two greet one another. They awkwardly chit-chat small talk for a few before they start accidentally colliding with one another's words. At this point, Sasha finally decides to come clean, saying that he has something he needs to talk to her about. He explains that since they didn't make up until the very last day of camp, he never got the chance to tell her why he was such a jerk all summer.
Right before I left for Camp Caprice, my girlfriend Clover dumped me for a soc. You know the type. Rich, popular, perfect teeth.
Mm-hmm.
And when I heard that obnoxious Courtney girl talking about your rich, popular boyfriend, Ian, I went ballistic. It was nothing personal.
Oh, water under the bridge. All part of a relationship, you know?
Yeah, about the relationship part.
Sasha! There you are.
Ginger is taken back when she sees Clover approaching. She stares at her, and the world around her begins to shatter. She replays her entire memory of Camp Caprice, recalling how they met, how Sasha treated her, and how that made her feel. How she laid all of her feelings out there for him, how they left things in the end, how she's thought about him since, how she's reached out over and over to no response. And just like that, it all comes crashing down, and the hopeful picture that she's had painted in her head all this time is washed over by this stunning revelation. Struck by the news that Clover is back in Sasha's life.
What you doing way back there hidden behind all these band dorks? No offense.
Ginger, this is Clover.
Of course it is.
See, we got back...
Oh boy, you know, I gotta get ready for the competition. Great seeing you again, and nice meeting you, Heather.
It's Clover.
Ginger, good luck?
Not supposed to say good luck. Means bad luck.
As Ginger walks away, trying her best not to show her feelings to Sasha and Heather, we cut back over to Carl, whose world is also falling apart. Kids are gathered outside of his doghouse, very angry at him for faking the whole psychic act. They're chanting that he's a fake and demanding that he take some accountability for his scummy actions. Hoodsie asks him what they're going to do, and Carl keeps up the psychic act, saying that nothing's coming to him, but he's sure it will soon.
I know I have this psychic thing.
Carl, wake up and smell the coffee percolating. It's time to give this psychic junk a rest. You don't have a gift. So now we gotta give these people their money back, or we won't live long enough to laugh about this when we're old.
Carl agrees begrudgingly, and he goes out of the doghouse to start giving these kids their dollars back. As he sits there on his hands and knees being belittled by everyone, we cut over to his sister in the bathroom at this school, almost 3 hours away from home, as she's trying to stop crying. She talks to herself, saying that it was so obvious and that she should have known that he had a girlfriend, when, out of nowhere, Miranda of all people comes out of a stall, making Ginger realize that she isn't alone. She tells Ginger that if she were her, she'd ditch that god-awful locket, but Ginger says that she's just having some trouble letting it go.
Yeah, well, music can be a great healer and all, so let's go be in band. Since this mess with Sasha is out of your hands, why not focus on a challenge you can actually win?
The extra grande triangle?
That's what I'm talking about.
Oh, thanks, Miranda. I know you didn't mean to, but you actually cheered me up.
And the joy I feel for having done so is positively overwhelming.
After that pep talk of sorts, we cut to the football field at sunset, where Ginger, Miranda, Katie, and the rest of the band are giving it their all in their performance. They have things dialed in very tight and sounding excellent. The performances are spot on, and when they reach the peak of the crescendo, Ginger hits the extra grande triangle at the perfect time, bringing things together flawlessly. The crowd goes wild as the kids all celebrate, tossing their hats in the air, as we cut back over to Carl having given the last kid there a refund. With everyone taken care of, Carl is left with one last dollar, excitedly thinking that means he at least got one prediction correct. Hoodsy points out that 1 out of 100 is pure luck, and it definitely confirms that he isn't psychic.
I'm having another vision. We got a couple of visitors coming.
You're never gonna let go of this, are you? What are you doing?
Right after my psychic vision, I just remember who the dollar belonged to.
Open up! Terrence! Me and my brother decided for you. It's gonna be nuclear wedgies.
As Carl and Hoodsy barricade the door in a panic, fearing for their lives, we cut back over to the school bus driving through the night with Ginger and the rest of the band aboard, heading back home. Everyone on the bus is singing a celebratory song while Ginger sits at the back of the bus, reflecting on how much she learned about life on this trip.
I suppose you could say I went on this trip to find something I lost, but I ended up almost losing something I found.
Heidi-ho, Heidi-hen, we went and put the sass in brass. Heidi-ho, Heidi-hen, we went and put the sass in brass. Please, not again.
Man, you guys, I really couldn't think of a better episode for us to end this video on. This one, in all aspects, is really a perfect bookend for this chapter of the story we're digesting through this series of videos. This one certainly closes one chapter and hints at the next one simultaneously in very subtle yet bold ways that you may not have picked up on. Now, one thing I really need to touch on from the start though is Dodie's awful advice of saying that with boys it's out of sight, out of mind. Again, here we go with the awful blanket statements. Dodie saying this is just so problematic, and by the end of this episode it's proven to be the furthest thing from the truth. What really frustrates me from the beginning is the fact that Macy was right and nobody really paid her much mind. Dodie steamrolled over Macy's logic with her blind optimism, when in all reality, if Ginger had actually considered that point of view more, she would have realized that it was a red flag that Sasha was ghosting her. She definitely should have listened to Macy over Dodie, and I feel like time and time again, that's kind of proven to be the case. Not always, but more often than not, Macy seems to know more about what she's talking about than Dodie does. In this one, we watched Dodie basically build Ginger up to a position where she headed to Sasha's school expecting him to still be interested in a relationship. She walks up to him at one point and even ends up caressing his arm a bit before she knew that he had a girlfriend. If she had listened to Macy though, she probably would have approached it in a more reserved, I'd like an explanation please type of way. Or at minimum, one with way less expectations. By all means, that definitely would have been a lot more dramatic, but having her guard up already when approaching this situation would have made her expecting the worst, likely considering all of the different possible outcomes along the way, and as a result, she probably wouldn't have been as shocked and hurt as she was in the end. If she had stopped to at least consider that Sasha might not be responding for a reason, she may have considered the possibility of him having a girlfriend already. All in all, I don't want to say this is Dodie's fault because ultimately Ginger is the one that followed her advice like it was the greatest thing that she's ever heard. But if Dodie hadn't had such an unrealistic mindset, things likely would have played out differently here, and Ginger likely would have been able to approach this a little more cautiously for the sake of her own emotions. We've touched a lot in this video about Dodie being a self-absorbed and pretty lame friend. And on that note, anyone else think it was kind of messed up that Dodie didn't even know that Macy wasn't in band anymore? These girls are best friends, and I'm sure they tell each other everything. I figured that Macy being forced to take an extended leave from band would be something that she would bring up, as I imagine she's probably pretty bummed about it. In all reality, maybe she just didn't say anything. But still, even if she did, there's a chance that Dodie wasn't listening because she cares more about herself and Ginger's drama more than whatever Macy has going on. Furthermore, it really pissed me off to hear Dodie proudly proclaim that she's the president of the ethnic cooking club while admitting that she literally has no qualifications and is terrible at cooking. That's either incredibly despicable or blissfully ignorant, or maybe it's a mix of the both, but either way, she doesn't realize that her taking that position on a whim is taking it from someone who could have genuinely benefited from having that in their portfolio as a chef. She's such a self-centered jerk, and I honestly think I might hate her a little bit. I try not to throw that around so willy-nilly, but Dodie just is such an awful person on top of being such a bad friend in my opinion. On the note of Ginger's friends, I found it interesting how we saw the introduction of Katie in this one. Katie plays a pretty big role in this episode, and other than that, we would only see her as a background character in like one other episode. I will say though, I really thoroughly appreciate the role that she played in this one. Specifically, I had a lot of respect for Katie telling Ginger to be careful and pointing out that it's like she's got her and Sasha going steady already in her mind. This right here was a great warning, and all in all, it kind of symbolizes part of the message being told. It's important to manage your expectations. Poor Ginger has been writing this boy all summer, and she goes to his school expecting him to welcome her with open arms, not considering that he could have a whole other life going on there that she isn't aware of. The thing is, Ginger sees the best in people. She doesn't assume the worst of Sasha because he wasn't responding, even though she probably should have. Part of that is, of course, because of Dodie setting her up with this expectation that if you aren't around a guy, he's just gonna forget that you exist, and as soon as you come back around, it'll be as if his life was just on hold for you. But another part of that is just because of who Ginger is as a person. She's the kind of girl who loves strongly and trusts those who come across as genuine. Her and Sasha left things on a very romantic note, and she assumed that things would still be like that when they reunited. I truly feel like Ginger would have benefited from adding a friend like Katie to her friend group on a consistent basis. Dodie is the one who generally can't read a situation and is happy to quickly give her input, which is usually incorrect. Meanwhile, Macy is usually the kind of person who can read a situation pretty easily, it seems. However, she either lacks in bringing it up to everyone, or if she does bring it up, someone like Dodie dismisses her, causing her usually correct thoughts to be suppressed under the overwhelm of Dodie's selfish personality. Speaking of selfish and awful people though, we have to talk about how Sasha is an absolute garbage can of a human being. This kid is worse than the garbage itself. He is the sludge at the bottom of the can. You know that icky, nasty muck that leaves you wanting to throw the whole can away instead of hosing it out in the yard? He's that. We saw him and Ginger go through a lot at Camp Caprice together, mainly because he was a jerk. He was so quick to believe Courtney Grippling saying that Ginger had a boyfriend who was rich and popular. We saw him treat Ginger like crap, and as a result, instead of ever saying sorry and explaining why he was acting that way, Ginger basically just decided to overlook his crappy behavior and lay her heart out on the table for him. Then, we're left with them having gone their separate ways on a very positive note. Fast forward to today though, a few months later, and this kid is out jogging at PE when he catches sight of Ginger, this sweet girl who still has feelings for him, who he just blatantly ignored after setting her up to believe that he felt the same way. And what does he do? He awkwardly turns around and tries to jog the other way. The little snake isn't able to weasel his way out of this one though, because Ginger still saw him and immediately called to him, letting him know that she saw him. She sees this guy mid-turning around, and she sees him running in the opposite direction of the rest of the kids, and she still calls out to him, thinking that he's gonna be open to reciprocating her feelings. It just makes me feel so bad for Ginger because it's clear that again, she sees the best in him and wants nothing but to have a positive experience here. All because she's got these rose-colored heart-shaped glasses on thanks to Dodie. On the other hand though, it makes me truly think Sasha is the lowest of the low. This kid has all sorts of morals and is able to say something at Camp Caprice when he thought that Ginger was being shady and playing him. However, that ends up being proven completely false. It's proven that Ginger didn't have a boyfriend and that Courtney was making the whole thing up. Fast forward though to the point where the roles are reversed, and now he's the one who's being called into question. Yet when it's time to come clean about his actions during the point of Ginger calling him and writing to him, he chooses to be a coward and run away from telling her the truth. This jerk who is so quick to point fingers at Ginger for doing exactly what he's doing would rather run away from his problems and just assume that Ginger will move on without any closure, instead of taking the time to tell her the truth and help her move on. He's basically just trying to continue operating as if what happened at Camp Caprice never happened. He comes home from the trip after being a complete jerk to this girl and still winning her heart, to just completely disregard how she feels. It's just such a very disappointing situation, but with that being said, it comes with an important lesson that Ginger sadly learned through a very painful process. Of course, we have to talk about that moment where it all comes crashing down around her, and both us as viewers, as well as Ginger, realize that Sasha is guilty of everything that he accused Ginger of. He dragged her for being the kind of girl that dates guys that are rich and popular. He said really hurtful things about her directly to her face. Then, come to find out that his girlfriend is straight up the Courtney Grippling of this school. Sure, Ginger had a crush on Ian Richton, but that wasn't due to his popularity or anything. She had liked him for a long time regardless of his popularity. Even then though, she didn't date him. Meanwhile, Sasha is the one full-blown in a relationship with a rich, popular social girl who very obviously lacks self-awareness or care for others, considering how she just walks up and calls everyone around her a geek, without any regard for how that makes them feel, thinking that telling Ginger no offense makes it excusable. The cherry on top being that point when Sasha first begins telling Ginger the truth. He talks about how he was mad because his girlfriend dumped him for some rich and popular guy with a tone about it as if he's still mad at people who do that, not considering that he himself is straight up doing that exact thing to Ginger. By all means, they weren't dating and he didn't dump her for a rich and popular girl, but the point still stands that he led her on and made her feel like they were going to be able to write to one another and talk on the phone, pursuing a relationship until they could see one another again. Yet, instead of sticking to that promise, he completely didn't respond to Ginger at all because he likely got home and immediately got back together with his rich and popular girlfriend, preferring her over Ginger. And of course, with Ginger being far away, he could just conveniently ignore her. He's just such a little hypocrite, and as much as it hurt seeing Ginger's perceptions of the situation fall apart in this moment, I will admit that they captured the feelings in such a great and artistic way, and it really felt so good to see her finally realize that Sasha is a garbage person and that she dodged a bullet. I will be honest though, I can't help but wonder what would have unfolded if none of this had happened. What if Ginger didn't come to see him and instead just waited until next summer to see him at Camp Caprice? To be real with you guys, I bet if this didn't happen, they would have both gone to Camp Caprice again this summer, and Sasha would have gotten to have his cake and eat it too. He'd be able to continue with Ginger like he had never even had a girlfriend waiting for him back at home, and she wouldn't have known anything. She probably wouldn't have questioned much too, given how quick she was to excuse his crappy actions in this episode, saying that it was okay for him to not write her back because he was probably busy or didn't have paper or stamps. Or even when they were face to face, saying that his actions at Camp Caprice are all water under the bridge. I mean, I do appreciate Ginger letting bygones be bygones, yet she was way too quick to excuse his actions for him before he even offered up any explanation. At first, it was almost as if she didn't care what the reason was because she wanted to be with him that badly. It really does make me worry about how much Sasha would have been able to manipulate her if she hadn't gotten curious and attempted to make in-person contact with him. Furthermore, I also wonder how this private conversation would have gone if Heather didn't show up. We can tell plain as day by the way that Heather approached that clearly Sasha didn't tell her that he was going to meet up with Ginger. He didn't even tell her that there was a girl that he met at summer camp, I'm sure. He hid all of this from his girlfriend because he's a shady little fuckboy. It really just feels like Sasha was trying to do his best to put this fire out and do as much damage control as possible, and honestly, he's lucky that Ginger is such a calm and level-headed person. Other people may not have let him get away with this. Other people may have stirred the pot and told Heather that she was the girl that he kissed this summer while he was away at camp. This whole situation, though, just really has me contemplating how he would have spun things if Heather didn't walk in the middle of the conversation. Honestly, I have extreme doubt that he would have told the whole truth. Or maybe he would have told a watered-down version of the truth. However, nothing he said could have ever hit anywhere as hard as Heather walking up herself and just immediately putting her foot in her mouth as Sasha stands there face-palming. This face-palm from him told us so much. This right here was him physically saying, "Yep, my girlfriend is a Courtney Grippling and I really am a jerk, aren't I?" Because, of course, this little coward would never verbally admit that. Considering that I've probably beaten the dead horse of Sasha being a jerk enough by this point, I certainly want to talk about how surprising it was when Ginger was hurt. It was Miranda of all people who would make her feel better. This expands further on our seeing the growth in Courtney and Miranda as characters. In the last one, I pointed out how Miranda has grown more spiteful than ever, but when they end up hitting us with this episode, they would kind of loosen our view on just how rude she is. Don't get me wrong, even in her making Ginger feel better, she still insulted her, saying that the competition with Sasha's girlfriend can't be won, but her battle with the extra grande triangle can be. I mean, when we dig into that statement, she's basically saying that Ginger will never be what Sasha's girlfriend is. Which, of course, she won't be because Ginger and Heather are two clearly different people, and, well, I'm glad that Ginger isn't a Heather. But to Miranda, that's her recognizing Heather being of higher social status than Ginger, likely among other things, and attempting to drag Ginger down while simultaneously making her feel better about the situation. It's one of those where you can tell they're trying to show us that Miranda is capable of having some compassion for Ginger, but they don't want us to forget who Miranda is and what she is really about deep down inside. They're essentially telling us that we can trust Miranda a bit, but subtly hinting at the fact that Ginger still shouldn't let her guard down around her. On that exact note, I don't want to spoil anything, but the ending of this episode is very much so foreshadowing things to come, in my opinion. As the episode comes to an end, we see the bus entering Sheltered Shrubs, Ginger's hometown, as she looks out the back of the bus, reflecting on her experience today in the world outside of this small town. And as they enter, we hear Miranda say, "Oh please, not again." Now this, as kids, we all saw and took in at face value, I'm sure. The band kids were singing, Miranda was annoyed by it again, so she was complaining about it just like she was before. But when we look at the big picture here, it could potentially symbolize Miranda basically saying that she's fed up with being around Ginger and having her in her life. One way we could look at it is Miranda wishing that Ginger and Sasha could have worked out, that way she wouldn't need to worry about Ginger being competition anymore, considering that the two of them tend to like the same boys pretty often. Or we could look at it like, in general, her saying "here we go again" as she comes back home, just kind of reflecting on how she wishes that she could get rid of Ginger because she doesn't like her. This right here, to leave it as vague as possible, is definitely foreshadowing things that we're going to be seeing in the next video in this series. A story arc that's actually really dark and would play a big role in Ginger's overall fate and how her future would unfold in the long run. Now, going in a bit of a different direction, I certainly want to bring up that scene with all of the band kids surrounding Ginger on the football field and being hostile towards her for seemingly joining in on this trip with no intentions of taking the band seriously, when all of them worked so hard to put on a perfect show. The feeling of overwhelm that they were able to portray here is just astounding. The look on Ginger's face, combined with the background music and everyone looming in closer, it just really captures that feeling of knowing that you're in the wrong and being called on it and essentially placed in check. In a position where you feel so small because you're already struggling emotionally, and now you've done something wrong and selfish, and people are mad at you as a result. It's a tough one though, because they have every right to be upset with Ginger. All of these kids worked really hard to get the band to this point. They put in hours upon hours of work, and all of a sudden Ginger shows up and just gets an instrument dropped in her lap, seeming as if she's looking for an easy accolade. This scene was them realizing that she was using all of them for a free ride to see this guy, while they're under the impression that they can rely on her to help them see this to the end. As much as I don't like the way that the teacher kind of shamed Ginger in front of everyone and enabled them to kind of be rude to her, I see why everyone here would be frustrated. With that being said though, it's one of those situations where a one-on-one chat between Ginger and the teacher was definitely the better option rather than the whole class jumping in on it too. One thing I really did find interesting as well was how this story was presented in a way that Carl and Ginger's stories kind of mirrored one another in a sense. They both went through some stuff, hoping for the best, then the whole world comes crashing down around them both at the same time, yet 2.5 hours away from one another. Carl has all of the kids in his class mad at him, meanwhile Ginger has the entire band mad at her. To me, it was a really interesting storytelling tool. There were times in the show where stories would reach their climax at separate times, and times like these where the peak of the story would seemingly be met simultaneously. In this one, it really felt like the stories genuinely benefited from following a similar structure to one another, even though they were drastically different. It really helped emphasize the amount of rain that was coming down when it did start to pour for both Ginger and Carl, and ultimately, it made the calm after the storm so much more peaceful, for Ginger at least. Carl, I think, got an atomic wedgie. In closing, reflecting back on this episode, there are a few things that I want to bring up that don't really affect the story too much, but they are worth bringing up for the sake of understanding this episode. First of all, I found it very interesting how early on a big plot point is the Grippling family buying stake in an ancient Egyptian tomb. I get that this was just a random plot point to give Carl a reason to want to make money, but it's kind of funny to me that it's not brought up again, and we don't see much of Blake after this scene. He antagonizes Carl for all of a few minutes later on, but that's about it. What's funny though is how the Gripplings couldn't buy any percentage of an ancient Egyptian tomb if they wanted to, because that's illegal and impossible. Those are pieces of cultural heritage that are actually protected by the Egyptian government. They can't be privately owned by a singular family or private entity. I mean, even if they could though, I don't think that means Blake could just go waltzing in to explore like he said he was preparing to do by playing that computer game. It's kind of funny because in all reality, Blake could have been pulling all of this completely out of thin air and straight up lying about it, and of course Carl and Hoodsey wouldn't have known any difference because they didn't do any research into the topic. They just assumed that it was real and said that they wanted in on the action. What's even more funny though is that even if these two little kids could get in on owning 1% of an ancient tomb, they wouldn't be able to go through this other kid to get it. It would have to be through his parents because Blake himself isn't the one whose name is on the purchase contract. Of course, on top of that, Carl wouldn't be able to buy it because he's underage. He would have to have his mom sign the contract. It's kind of funny to me how blatantly unrealistic all of this is, but nevertheless, we have to keep in mind that we're operating on cartoon logic here. Elaborating more on that cartoon logic though, one thing that I found kind of funny is the fact that the extra grande triangle isn't even a real instrument. They totally made this one up. I fell down the triangular shaped rabbit hole and yeah, the largest triangle I could find was like 10 inches from point to point. This one that Ginger was wearing though was full-blown shoulder to shoulder and weighed like 50 plus pounds of solid metal. I did some pretty deep searching on the internet and I couldn't find a triangle that massive, which to me makes it pretty funny that this little girl has this gigantic metal thing strapped to her. If there were anything else that I want to touch on as it pertains to this episode, it would be their fantastic implementation of the Copper Colored Ponies song. First of all, that was the song that Ginger wrote for Sasha when they were at Camp Caprice, so it's a callback to past events in that way, but I really enjoyed how they changed it up in this one. We heard it as a marching band tune, we heard it as a rock song. It was just really cool to see them call back to that last episode that we saw Sasha in more than just one way. The subtle things like this, bringing back music that we associate with that episode, really helps a lot of us invoke those same feelings that we had when we saw that one, and it reminded us where we left off in the story as far as piggybacking off of that story is concerned. Circling back to where we began this chapter in our journey of analyzing As Told by Ginger, I truly feel that all of these episodes we reflected on perfectly encapsulate the sentiment of, well, I paid a visit, and while it's possible I missed it, it seems so different, yet exactly the same. That statement does such an amazing job of pointing out how when you're in the position where you're feeling like your grass isn't as green as someone else's, you can tend to put yourself in situations where you're given the ability to experience the grass on that other side. We would see this through and through in this arc of the story in both Ginger and Darren. We would see Darren getting his braces off and experiencing how the world around him changes now that his appearance has changed. We would see Ginger walking on the wild side, experiencing what the world is like when you're crashing parties, associating with people older than you and in a different crowd than you, and seeing how the world around her changes now that she's being painted in a different light. We see Ginger testing the waters of falling for a boy that one of her best friends has feelings for, at first holding back her feelings, then seeing what happens when she lets them slip out a bit, and seeing how her friend group and the dynamic there changes when those kinds of feelings are brought into the mix. And lastly, we see Ginger paying a visit yet again to a picture that she's had painted in her head since last summer, of a relationship with Sasha. She physically goes there to see him, wondering what happens when they see each other again, curious about how it would change her world. In all of these scenarios, we would see Ginger paying a visit to that grass on the other side, and sure, while it's possible she missed it, it seemed so different, yet all exactly the same. She experienced what life was like in these different scenarios, wondering how different things would be upon approach, but ultimately, it would feel not much different from where she's been, and in the end, she would end up coming right back to where she started. These episodes perfectly encapsulate the message being told in the theme song. The sentiment that upon comparison of your own grass to the one that seems so green 2.5 hours away, you more often than not realize that your expectations of what that grass is like and the reality of what it's actually like are two very different things. But I can't believe I'm finally saying it. What do you guys think? Are you guys hyped to see where the story of Ginger and Darren's love life goes from here? Also, which characters or character dynamics would you like to jump into after we finish chatting about Ginger and Darren? Let me know in the comments down below. I always love seeing your guys' feedback. Of course, massive shout out to my friends over on Patreon, especially those in the true 90s kids tier. I really appreciate you guys, and I can't thank you enough for all of your support and for being some of my favorite people on this planet. It's almost 3 a.m. right now as I'm recording this, and I'm just feeling so much gratitude, you guys. Thank you, patrons. You guys are all so amazing, and true 90s kids, you guys make my world go round. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to drop a like and give a little praise to the algorithm in hopes that it pushes this one to everyone else. If you're down for another nostalgic walk down memory lane, check out this video on the left about an episode of Cat Dog that you definitely didn't realize was this morbid, or you can check out this cool video on the right. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'm so excited to see you guys in the next one. Peace.